Chapter 1307. It could be said that the intelligence room had the largest number of people and occupied the largest space in the First Army's General Command. In order to filter and store the massive amount of information, Lotus and Fran had specially opened up an underground space for the advisor department. 70% of the nearly 200 advisors worked in this space. At the same time, it was also the most resource-consuming office. Not only was it equipped with a rare stone of lighting, but it was also provided with free chaos drinks to refresh one's mind at night, which made the other departments extremely envious. However, the intelligence office often complained incessantly. Ever since the Pearl of the Northern Region proposed the spy plan, the results had gradually become apparent. The number of secret letters sent from the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart had increased from 2 or 3 a week to nearly 100 a day. Although the advisor department's main function was to analyze intelligence when it was first established, most of the intelligence came from investigations and war reports, which were not only neat, concise, but also traceable. However, the hundreds of pieces of information every day were irrelevant, and even the wording was a problem. It took a lot of time just to understand the true meaning, which made the screening process like a complicated jigsaw puzzle. Of course, this was not the worst. Compared to reading and analyzing the information, dealing with the secret letters was the biggest headache. In theory, the increasing amount of information was really against common sense. After all, the demons were now blockading the Red Mist border, so it was not easy to send information out. However, after Hillfox took over as the spy department's director, there were many ways to transmit information. For example, the secret letters were tattooed on the inside of animal skins, placed in the middle of a shoulder pole, or simply stuffed in the stomach of a salted fish. As long as the nobles in the occupied areas did not stop trading, they could not stop the information from flowing out of the occupied areas. Most of the time, even the messengers did not know that they had become part of the intelligence chain. However, because of this, there were many kinds of secret letters. For example, the feeling of personally taking out the silk from the stomach of a fish was definitely not very good. Not to mention that they had to endure the fishy smell and clean it before reading it. If their daily work changed from leisurely sipping afternoon tea and writing reports to finding all kinds of letters in a large pile of rubbish, and then restoring them to useful information, anyone would feel dissatisfied. But even so, no one dared to slack off. After all, this department was also the department that Edith and Ironaxe valued the most. Procrastinating in front of them was undoubtedly courting death. Walking into the intelligence room, the Pearl of the Northern Region saw Ironaxe and Hillfox talking about something. There were dozens of pieces of paper on the table in the middle of the room, which were obviously transcribed by the staff officers. She scanned through the messages and found that most of them came from the Kingdom of Everwinter. Most of them were scattered news such as a new troop of demons has been stationed in a certain city's north today. A certain noble has died mysteriously, and his title has been replaced by a certain person. A giant living rock monster has appeared in the direction of the border, and so on. It was difficult to glean much valuable information from them. However, this was not surprising. The reason why the spy plan could progress so quickly was not only because of Hill's contribution, but also because of black money. Ever since she suggested contacting the sender of the black card, the person behind the scenes had also come forward. Although he was only an agent, he had frankly expressed his willingness to help Grey Castle. This organization originated from the Kingdom of Dawn, and also had a certain influence in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. Of course, this influence was mainly manifested in the underground black market and the rats. Since the information was collected by the rats, the quality of the information was naturally not very high. Perhaps there were many street rumors and fallacies, but no matter how inefficient it was much better than the previous black information. There were also a few pieces of information that caught her attention. There was news of forced recruitment of boatmen in several places. What do you think? Ironaxe also noticed the Pearl of the Northern Region's arrival, and took the initiative to ask. If I remember correctly, when Princess Garcia attacked the Kingdom of Everwinter, she brought a large number of ships. Edith pondered for a moment. If the church didn't destroy those ships, I'm afraid they're still somewhere in the Kingdom of Everwinter. It seems that you also care about this. Compared with other information, at least this piece of information has been verified by many parties and is more credible. Edith spread out her hands and said, ships can only be used for transportation. Either the demons need to transfer a large number of troops, or they plan to attack from the sea. But I don't think the second possibility is very likely. What's the reason? Iron Axe asked. After fighting for so long, the demons have no reason to not know the power of cannons. Whether they attack Archduke Island or the sedimentation bay by sailing ships, they will be fiercely bombarded before they land. With the speed of sailing ships, it's no different from suicide, Edith explained. If they secretly bypass the Wolfheart Harbor and directly enter the Kingdom of Dawn and other places, they will face the dilemma of insufficient red mist. So I'm more inclined to the former. For the purpose of war, the demons need to quickly gather their troops at the front line. So it's the most reasonable choice to advance by land and sea. Then she looked at Hill and asked, what do you think? Hill bowed slightly to Edith and said, Your Excellency, I'm not good at analyzing the battle situation, so I can't predict what the demons will do. The only thing I can do is to combine these clues and hand them to the general staff. He's a good talent, Edith thought. Compared to blindly agreeing with me, it's obviously more valuable for Hill to be able to judge his own talents and know his place. No wonder His Majesty appointed him to lead the spy plan. Since even you can't find any more clues, I guess there's no other way, Iron Axe said helplessly. So we only know that the demons are gathering troops, but we don't know their specific distribution and strategic purpose. It's really torturous. The main reason is that the evacuation of the Kingdom of Wolfheart is very thorough. So Hill lost the opportunity to plant spies at the front line. If you didn't evacuate the residents, we might have already found the demons, Edith said half-jokingly. I don't dare to disobey His Majesty's order. Iron Axe shook his head and said, Besides, the First Army can't put all their hopes on rats. The information won't always be so trivial, Your Excellency, Hillfox suddenly said. Iron Axe raised his eyebrows and said, You mean, the information will become more complete? Yes, he replied. The most important thing I've learned after staying in the Kingdom of Dawn for so long is that as long as the plan is reasonable, the intelligence network will automatically expand. Chapter 1308. To put it simply, we'll let those eyes find opportunities on their own. Hillfox picked up a pen and drew a tree diagram on a piece of white paper. Since we're paying for information and not individuals, the more effective information they send back at the same time, the more generous the reward. In order to obtain more information, they'll definitely look for their own eyes. In His Majesty's words, this is called developing underlings. I see. Edith quickly grasped the key point. In order to win over the underlings, the upper must also give them certain benefits, which allows the underlings to continue developing. Hill nodded. You're right. Whether it's a sentinel or a spy, they're all at the end of a line. No matter how long it takes, there won't be any changes. This makes the information they receive relatively reliable, but it's also limited by their field of vision. But the rats will always be the rats. Iron Axe frowned. No, sir, the most interesting thing about this method is that the upper and lower don't represent the upper and lower ranks. The upper of a soldier will always be an officer, but the lower of a rat won't necessarily be a rat. As long as the benefits are right, the rats can also turn the nobles into their own eyes. Edith said word by word. Hill's eyes revealed a trace of admiration. That's right. The benefits aren't limited to the golden dragon. Everyone's needs are different, and understanding this need has nothing to do with the social class. This means that the development of the underlings may cross the social class. The current information is extremely messy and vague because of the rat's field of vision. When the information line expands to the upper ranks, the value of the information will inevitably increase. Iron Axe pondered for a moment. Even so, it'll probably take a long time for those eyes to contact the higher ranks. That's true in normal times, Hill replied. But now that the Kingdom of Everwinter is in turmoil, I think the expansion of the information line may be faster than we think. In fact, these scattered pieces of information have already revealed this point. For example? Iron Axe touched his chin. Hill laughed. According to the statistics, the information about the nobles has been declining recently. Even if there's any, it's mostly negative news, such as debauchery and street fights. To those in power, this wasn't a situation that should occur during a war. It reflected that the upper echelons of the Everwinter Empire had deviated from their original duties, and the pressure they were under was constantly increasing. Thus, they could only use this method to alleviate the situation. Tracing back to the source, this change is likely to have started when the migration squad of the First Army defeated the nobles' ambush. He paused for a moment before continuing. Although I was still in the City of Glow in the Kingdom of Dawn at that time, I can imagine the impact this news had on the nobles. Once a person's heart wavers, an opportunity will appear. People who are usually disdainful can become life-saving straws at certain times. Please rest assured, sir, that day shouldn't be too far away. Everwinter, Snow Reflection Castle. I'm sorry to have kept everyone waiting. Master is not feeling well today, and is unable to receive guests. Please return first. The butler bowed to everyone in the hall. When Master's health improves, he will definitely give everyone an explanation. The hall instantly burst into an uproar. We've been waiting for weeks. Even if he has a demonic disease, it shouldn't be to the extent where he can't even come out and meet us, right? I don't need any bullshit explanation. I've fought the war for him. Where's the territory we agreed on? That's right. Even if it's not convenient for him to receive guests, he can at least take out the title deed. This butler is lying. Yesterday, I clearly saw Viscount Narnos enter the castle, and come out only after 4 hours. Not just Lord Viscount, there are also many tavern dancers who go in every day. Does Lord Duke look for women instead of sage scholars when he's sick? Please be careful with your words. The butler cleared his throat and said in a cold tone, perhaps you've been unrestrained for too long because you've lost your territory, but don't forget that since you've decided to serve the Duke of the Northern Region, your master's vassals, I think all of you should know better than me the crime of slandering a monarch. In this weather, living in a prison isn't as comfortable as living in a hotel. Following this warning, the guard at the door also took 2 steps forward, the armor on his body creaking. The noise in the hall suddenly became much quieter. Obviously, if there was a conflict here, it would be disadvantageous to the crowd. The butler softened his tone and said, I know you're anxious, but our top priority is to defeat the rebels of Grey Castle. Please be patient. By the way, Master will hold a banquet in the castle hall tonight to reward you. Although he can't attend, I hope all of you will have a good time. Probably for the sake of the banquet, the crowd temporarily suppressed their last bit of dissatisfaction and walked out of the hall while muttering. Outside the castle, the topic of discussion had changed from debt collection to the food and women at the banquet that night. Only Fuller returned to the hotel gloomily. After spending so much time with Duke Marwain, the only thing left in his heart was a deep sense of disappointment. If the people of Grey Castle had been defeated in the Battle of Frost Town because they were more adept at using weapons and had more fighting spirit, then they could learn from their mistakes and try again. But what did Duke Marwain do? Not only did he escape from the front lines, but he also locked himself in Snow Reflection Castle, as if he had completely forgotten the heroic words he had said before the battle. Not only that, he also owed the Promised Land. Not all the nobles who participated in the battle were like this. For example, Viscount Narnos could enter and leave the castle freely, but the ones who were rejected were the knight like him, who had been living under Marwain's roof. Before the battle, Duke Marwain had told him that he valued him greatly. Breaking one's word was a taboo for a monarch, but Marwain obviously did not care about his reputation anymore in order to protect his territory. Fuller had submitted to Marwain in order to find a chance to revive his family. But now, not to mention the fief, even his subordinates and guards had died in that battle. At this moment, he could be considered to be truly alone. Could a knight with no squires or land still be considered a noble? The others had the capital to drag on, but what about him? A year or 6 months later, who would still recognize his family? Of course, if the demons could defeat Roland Wimbledon, Duke Marwain would gain great power, and it would be easy for him to help him revive his family. The problem was, Judging from Marwain's current expression, would he really be willing to help someone who had nothing? Would he leave his fate in the hands of others, or would he try to leave a way out for himself? Fuller paced back and forth in his bedroom and finally stopped. He went to the desk and took out a folded envelope from the bottom of the drawer. After hesitating for a moment, he gently tore open the envelope. Chapter 1309. This is an easy job. You don't have to take any risks. All you have to do is place the message at the agreed location, and no one will know what you've done. The words of the man in the silver mask, who claimed to be the person in charge of black money, echoed in his ears again. Ridiculous. Why should I help Greycastle? They even want to uproot the nobles. What good will it do me if I win? The argument was still fresh in his mind. I thought Black Money was a smart businessman. I didn't expect you to say such stupid things. Aren't you afraid that I'll tie you up and hand you over to Lord Marwain in exchange for a handsome reward? If you really wanted to do that, there wouldn't be this interview in the first place. The man's tone did not change at all, as if he did not care about his own safety. The fact that I'm still sitting here is enough to prove your will. It's because you're a smart man that we're willing to provide this opportunity. Unfortunately, you're wrong. My loyalty to the Duke is unquestionable. Now get out of here before I change my mind. Of course I'll leave now. But sir, this is the so-called opportunity. Black Money has no intention of forcing you to make a choice. It's your freedom to do what you want. The man in the silver mask stood up and bowed deeply to him. He then placed a black card on the tea table. The last thing I want to tell you is that Greycastle will never forget anyone who has served it. Then we'll meet again someday. Fuller took a deep breath and stopped his messy thoughts. The room suddenly became quiet. Never forget. Anyone who has served Greycastle. Huh? It was ironic. He had submitted to Duke Marwain in order to restore the glory of his family. Roland Wimbledon, who was the enemy of all the nobles, was supposed to be the most unforgiving person. But now he found that he could not make up his mind. The man sent by Black Money might be a bastard, but he was right about one thing. If he really wanted to serve the Duke of the Northern Territory, he would have torn the card into pieces long ago instead of carefully hiding it in the drawer. After a long silence, Fuller looked up and sighed. He sat down in front of the desk. He took out a piece of white papyrus and unfolded it, then picked up a quill. What else did he have to lose? Taking back the territory had become more and more uncertain, and he did not seem to have any reason to bite the bullet and persist. Anyway, according to Black Money's method, I won't lose anything. I'll just take it as a bet on both sides. If the demons won, the situation could not get any worse. If the people of Greycastle won, he might be able to get compensation in other ways. With this thought in mind, Fuller put down her brush. In the evening, he wore a windbreaker and felt hat as he walked into Horn Alley in the inner city. This was the territory of the Northern Chamber of Commerce. Most of the people who came and went were merchants. By sunset, there were very few people moving around. At a gentle slope, Fuller found the location that the silver-masked man had mentioned. There was a huge silver fir tree between two brick houses. As a matter of fact, the transmission method that the other party had agreed upon was also the reason why he made this decision. There was no addressee, and there was no receiver, which greatly reduced the risk. At least he did not have to worry that Black Money would use this information to threaten him, or that other people would notice that he had been in close contact with an unknown person. Fuller wandered around for a while. After seeing that there were no suspicious people around, he quickly went behind the silver fir tree and touched the tree hole in the middle. As expected, there was a secret compartment hidden in the tree hole. However, the compartment was completely an ordinary piece of wood, and it was difficult to detect it unless he touched it with his own hands. He stuffed the letter into the secret compartment and pushed it back to the wooden partition. That was the completion of the task. He had deliberately written the contents of the letter. Even if it was discovered by a third party, they would not be able to link it to him through the handwriting. Of course, this was not the end of the task. After that, Fuller returned to his residence and moved a flower pot to the windowsill of his bedroom. In the high-end residences in the inner city, such decorations could be found everywhere. No one would care about an inconspicuous potted plant. But for the people who were secretly observing this place, it was a signal that the message had been sent. From the beginning to the end, he did not need to contact anyone. As for who would take the letter and how it would be delivered to the people of Grey Castle, it had nothing to do with him. The moment he put the flower pot down, Fuller even felt a sense of relief. Just the gathering of information was done so meticulously. The difference between kings was really too great. He stood in front of the window and looked at the brightly lit castle district under the red fog. Thinking of the defeated, who were still happily enjoying the banquet, he no longer held any hope for Marwain. There was only one question left. Could Grey Castle really defeat the demons? The messenger stacked a thick stack of papers on the damp and dilapidated wooden table. Is this today's portion? Smarty lit the oil lamp. Thank you for your hard work. The other party did not respond. He sighed and repeated it with hand gestures. Only then did the messenger nod. This person was the silent one trained by his master. He could neither hear nor speak. He could only use simple hand gestures to convey orders or make inquiries. Unfortunately, there were no hand gestures to express his gratitude. Stand guard outside. Don't let anyone in. After Smarty let the silent one leave, he began to read through the information. This was a property that Black Money had set up for the underground Chamber of Commerce. Usually they used an invitation system, so in theory the possibility of outsiders breaking in was not high. But Smarty still chose to deal with the information in the cold basement, so that he could buy more time to burn down the place when danger arose. Although he did not know why his master was so concerned about the war in Grey Castle, that was not something he could meddle in. Since his master had ordered him to fully assist Grey Castle, the only thing he could do was to do his best. His main task at the moment was to reorganize the intelligence and deliver it to the Grey Castle people, without anyone noticing. Although the people of Grey Castle requested that all information be kept secret, there were not always opportunities to secretly send information out of the city, so there was a problem of priority. Considering that the caravans that were allowed to pass through usually came and went once a week, he had to turn the most reliable information into a secret letter, and mix it with the goods sent to the kingdom of Wolfheart. As for the other information, he could only find another way to send it. Most of the time the information came from the mouths of the rats, so it was rather messy. He often had to spend a lot of time sifting through it. But this time, Smarty noticed that there was a letter in the paper that was obviously different from the other information. The handwriting was neat and smooth, not something that had been casually copied from a tavern or on the street. It was also written in high-quality ink, and there were no wrinkles on the paper. It was obvious that the environment where it was written was much better than where the rats usually stayed. He subconsciously held his breath and carefully read through the letter from beginning to end, and the content of the letter was indeed different. Chapter 13:10. After flipping through the entire letter, Smarty felt a chill run down his spine. A demon lord that could open the gates of hell and allow troops to come and go as they please? Without a doubt, this was an extremely important piece of information. In fact, he was puzzled by the fact that the snow reflection castle had fallen without a single scratch. However, other than confirming that the demons had invaded the city from the north, he had heard all sorts of theories. It was obvious that the civilians who had witnessed the demons' arrival had all died in the invasion. Now he had finally obtained confirmation. However, what shocked him even more was that this demon lord was actually familiar with the rules of the human race. Not only did he know how to deal with the nobles, he had also become the actual ruler of the kingdom of Everwinter in a short period of time. Currently, the mobilization of the civilians in the various territories was basically under his instructions. The benefits that he had promised were also quite generous. Definitely not something that the people of Grey Castle would be able to provide. In addition, the description of the movements of the civilians in the letter was also very valuable. Although it could not be compared to the distribution of the demons' forces, at least it could be roughly analyzed where they had gone. What was certain was that the person who wrote this letter was definitely not a rat or a merchant. From this perspective, this person must be at the top of the kingdom of Everwinter. The contents of the entire letter were well organized and clear. There was no need to transcribe it. and it was also difficult to simplify it. As long as it was sent out in full, it would be an important piece of information. In terms of priority, it was without a doubt the highest grade. The problem was that the merchant caravan used to deliver the information had only left the snow reflection castle yesterday. In order not to attract as much attention as possible, Black Money had only placed one person in the caravan, and that person was the coachman. It was almost impossible for the caravan to turn back, and it would take a week for the next caravan to depart. In addition to the stop-and-go time on the road, the delivery time would only be even longer. Smarty hesitated for a long time before finally standing up and putting all the other papers on the table into the cabinet, leaving only the letter. Next, he sealed the letter with a waterproof wax. After doing all this, he blew out the oil lamp and put the letter away. He returned to the first floor and gestured to the silencer. "I want to go out of the city personally. If there is an accident here, light the kerosene downstairs." Just as Smarty was about to turn and leave, the silencer reached out and grabbed him, shook her head slightly, and then pointed at herself. "You want me to stay and leave the dangerous things to you?" Smarty chuckled. "I'm just delivering a letter. I'll be back in 2 or 3 days at most. You don't know how to speak, and you don't know where the meeting point is, so you can't help me." However, there were no such complicated words in sign language, so he only made a hand gesture. "This is an order." She loosened her grip on his hand. Smarty patted him on the chest and left the house without looking back. Since his master had requested his full assistance to Grey Castle, it was of utmost importance to deliver this letter as soon as possible. After all, according to the people of Grey Castle, information was time-sensitive. The longer the news was delayed, the more variables there would be. For this reason, they had set up an emergency contact point in a village more than 10 miles away from the city. They had also set up an incredible animal messenger. It was said that the message could be sent to the Kingdom of Dawn in just a few days. That village was the target of his trip. Leaving the Snow Reflection Castle without permission was risky, but generally speaking, it was still manageable. In fact, there were people escaping the northern region every day, and even leaving the Kingdom of Everwinter through various means. Although the red mist and the blood-like crimson moon did not have a substantial impact on people's lives, Grey Castle's propaganda and rumors of demons were gradually spreading. No matter how the Lord tried to stop them, he could not completely dispel people's fear of these terrifying alien races. These escapees were undoubtedly his best cover. Smarty knew that as long as he acted alone, the possibility of being targeted by flying demons was not high. As for the guards on the main roads, it was even easier to get rid of them. After all, the golden dragon was the norm in the human world. The reality was not much different from what he had expected. When the sun was about to rise the next day, Smarty passed through the south gate of the Snow Reflection Castle safely. In order to monopolize the few gold royals in his pocket, the guard did not even alarm the others and quietly opened the small door on the inner side of the castle wall. Once he crossed the ice abyss, there were no more obstacles. Every time he saw a black shadow in the sky, he would quickly dive into the snow. His white coat was a natural camouflage, and the footprints were not much different from those made by wild beasts. In the afternoon, he could faintly see the smoke rising from the village. Wiping the frost off his nose, Smarty could not help but quicken his pace. Just like in the city, he did not need to contact the people of Grey Castle. He only needed to leave the information at the agreed location and leave a secret code. But at this moment, the sound of hooves came from behind him. Smarty could not help but be stunned. He turned around and his heart sank. Damn it, why are there Snow Reflection Castle cavalry here? The people of Grey Castle had chosen this village because it was in a remote location. It would be difficult for 1 or 2 outsiders to sneak in. Usually, the nobles would choose to intercept refugees near the main road, so there was no reason for them to come here. The distance between the two quickly narrowed. It was obvious that the other party had seen him, and it was impossible for him to hide. Smarty simply stopped and put on a fawning smile. The other party had 2 horses, so as long as they gave him enough golden dragon, they should not make things too difficult for him. The cavalryman stopped his horse in front of him and looked down at him. "Brother, I knew that these refugees would choose a remote road. As expected, we found one. Ah, good luck. As expected. Are they patrol to catch refugees? My lord, please let me live. Smarty pretended to be extremely scared and fell to his knees in the snow. He held up the money bag with both hands, revealing the eye-catching golden dragon inside. I really don't want to stay in the same place as those demons from hell. They are all monsters who eat people without blinking. I am willing to give you all my savings. Please let me go. Oh, you have quite a lot of savings. The cavalryman bent over and took the money bag, a hint of a smile in his voice. Now it's all yours. Right, I have relatives in the kingdom of Wolfheart. As long as you don't take me back, I will find a chance to repay you in the future. Get up. Smarty secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Generally speaking, at this point he had passed. Refugees who were able to save up Golden Dragon were definitely rare, and even the relatives in the neighboring country would be more believable. If there was no benefit to killing, they would not want to cause more trouble. After all, letting 1 or 2 refugees go would not cause them any loss, so there was no need to cut off the possibility of repayment in the future. However, the cavalryman did not wave his hand and tell him to get lost. Instead, he lifted his helmet and said, "Look at me carefully." There was a striking scar on his cheek, as if he had been bitten by a ferocious beast. His entire ear was missing, and even half of his eye was deformed and twisted. The rolled flesh showed that the wound had obviously just healed. My lord, this is... Greycastle's firearms injured me, the cavalryman said slowly. At that time, everyone thought that I could not be saved, but I still survived. Even now, I can still feel the burning pain on my face, reminding me who caused all this. In the end, his voice was completely cold. A strong sense of foreboding suddenly rose in Smarty's heart. However, before he could pull away, another person who called himself a younger brother had already raised his hand and ruthlessly lashed the horsewhip across his face. Smarty only felt his vision go black, and he fell down holding his face. That's right, it's you. If it weren't for you bunch of damned refugees, why would I have to risk my life against Greycastle? What battle of divine will? What destiny of mankind? It's all bullshit. At this point, the cavalryman's voice was close to a roar. Don't worry, I won't take you back, and I won't kill you here. The only thing I want to do is to let you have a taste of my pain. Then, he pulled the reins and urged his horse to trample on Smarty's legs. Crack. An indescribable pain instantly surged into Smarty's brain, and he subconsciously screamed out. Then the second leg. Only when the snow was stained with blood, and his legs became a blurry mess of flesh did the cavalryman stop trampling on him. Don't worry, you're not the first and you won't be the last. Knight laughed sinisterly. Now you can run to your heart's content. Smarty did not notice when the 2 people left. He bit hard on his lip, forcing his scattered consciousness to focus. He had completely lost feeling in the lower half of his body, and the snow was slowly draining his body temperature. He touched the clothes on his chest, and the letter was still in its original position. In the eyes of the 2 people, he was no different from a dead man. Unexpectedly, he did not resent the 2 people in his mind, nor did he feel a strong sense of unwillingness. Under the torture of the stinging pain and the cold, it was extremely difficult to think, and the only thing left in his mind was the information in his arms. Smarty used the last of his strength to move towards the agreed-upon location. When he climbed to the top of a hill overlooking the village, the curtain of night was slowly enveloping the land. The occasional flickering of the fire in the village seemed close at hand, but also seemed as far away as the stars. He did not put the letter in the hiding place, because he himself was the last container for the information. As the darkness was about to engulf everything, the kind face of his master, Banach Lothar, appeared in front of Smarty's eyes. He closed his eyes and whispered softly. Chapter 13:11. 3 days later, the letter finally arrived at the command headquarters at Cage Mountain after being passed through many hands. After Hillfox opened it and read it, it was classified as most important information, and was immediately handed over to Edith. After reading the information, the Pearl of the Northern Region frowned. How many people are on Archduke Island now? She asked loudly. The staff members looked at each other. The first to answer her was the Light of Dawn. My lady, the First Army has more than 300 people on the island, and the construction team has about 2,500 people. There are also about the same number of islanders. If you want to know more about the specific composition of the people, I'll go and get the information. No need, Edith interrupted. Go and get Iron Axe and the other officers here. Our plan must be adjusted immediately. Quickly. Adjustment means, whether it's the soldiers or the construction team, Grey Castle, the Kingdom of Dawn, or the Kingdom of Wolfheart, they have to evacuate Archduke Island as soon as possible, Edith said solemnly. It's already a hopeless island. Everyone was in an uproar. But despite their shock, their long-trained professionalism made them immediately carry out the order. Just as the office was in chaos, Edith's gaze fell on a piece of paper in her palm. It was sent together with the letter. After a few breaths, she clenched her fists and sighed softly. The senior officers of the First Army quickly gathered and took turns to read the information sent from Snow Reflection Castle in Everwinter. Skylord Hacksword, huh? Brian's expression wasn't any better. If the contents of the letter are true, then this damned ability is a little too shocking. It's several kilometers long and can be used multiple times. I was wondering how the entire Everwinter Empire collapsed in just a few days. There wasn't even a single city that resisted to the end. Lightning and Maggie had once encountered a senior demon in the Great Rift Valley. Its ability to come and go without a trace had already been regarded as a key target to keep an eye on. Only now did they know that the demon was probably the Sky Lord that Osruk had mentioned. Furthermore, this was far from the limit of his power. Not only could he move himself, but he could also move troops over a large area through the door. Such a powerful ability could be considered a strategic level. The people at the meeting could not help but have a deeper understanding of the term Senior Demon Lord. Withdrawing from Archduke Island had become something that no one doubted. After all, it was easy to get on the island, but difficult to leave. If the natural barrier of the straits could not stop the enemy's movements, it would become a cage that imprisoned them. Not only that, but they had to race against time. According to the information provided in the letter and the clues summarized by the general staff, the demons had probably gathered a considerable number of troops at the front line, and this huge attack could begin at any time. Iron Axe decisively ordered, "Stop all construction on Archduke Island and evacuate the people on the island immediately. Not just the rented ships. I want to see everything that can float on the sea participate in this evacuation." "Yes, sir," the men chorused. After everyone left, Agatha said worriedly, "Why didn't such a powerful demon appear in the Second Battle of Divine Will?" "I think there are 3 reasons. First, Hacksword hadn't advanced to become a senior demon lord at that time, so he didn't have the ability he has now. Second, they thought that humans were not worth mentioning, and that the Skysea realm was the most important. As for the third," she deliberately paused. "Perhaps the higher-ups of the demons felt that it wasn't suitable to fight with humans." Iron Axe seemed to read her thoughts. "You think it's the third reason?" The Pearl of the Northern region shrugged. "Although the first answer exists in theory, it's actually avoiding the problem. The second one is hard to stand on. Although the demons have been fighting with the Skysea realm, with their attitude towards the god's relic, if they could easily defeat the Union, they definitely wouldn't let go of this relic. In a war that decides the fate of a race, underestimating the enemy is absolutely the most foolish thing to do. In other words, I guess they should have done their best." The Ice Witch's slightly gloomy eyes finally recovered a little. But at that time, the Union didn't know how to make firearms. If even the city walls were useless, I'm afraid that the Union would collapse even faster. It's not impossible that they wouldn't be able to move the god's relic in time. That's why it's worth thinking about. Edith gently tapped the table and did not directly answer the Ice Witch's doubts. Edith gently tapped the table and did not directly answer his question. "I've always been very concerned about the few descriptions in this letter. According to the author's few interactions with the Sky Lord, not only does Hacksword never use his ability to directly enter the Lord's castle, he rarely meets multiple nobles at the same time. His orders are mostly conveyed through sigils, as though he's guarding against them. This is obviously not conducive to his winning over the hearts of the people, which can be seen from the contents of the letter. The problem is, what kind of threat can the nobles pose to him? The ice which was stunned. Do you mean the god stone of retaliation? No matter how I think about it, that's the only possibility. The Pearl of the Northern region nodded. Since an extraordinary can be ashes or scroll, does that mean that a Grand Lord must be a magic slayer? Agatha also understood. The biggest difference between a senior demon and a mad demon was the amount of power they had. There was indeed no evidence that a senior demon would definitely have the power to slay a magic slayer. This also answered all the previous questions. The reason why the Sky Lord did not appear at the front lines of the fertile plains was because he was not proficient in direct battles. Whether it was breaking into the holy city built with god stone mines, fighting against an extraordinary wearing a god stone of retaliation, or facing an attack from a divine will above the transcendent level, all of these posed a great threat to anyone who was not a magic slayer. Furthermore, the Sky Lord's ability was extremely important, so he did not appear in front of the two armies. But this time he personally went into battle. Ironax muttered. Perhaps due to some unforeseen circumstances, he had no other choice. Edith walked to the window and gazed at the continent in the north. For example, the original main attacker could have been Osrook, or some other Grand Lord. But due to the circumstances, Hacksword could only step forward from behind the scenes. If that's the case, it's definitely a blessing for us. No matter what, facing one Grand Lord is always easier than facing several Grand Lords. You've already thought of a way to deal with Hacksword. Its ability is almost irreplaceable for strategic deployment, but using it to attack is not a good choice, she said slowly. As long as we don't suffer too many losses on Archduke Island, the outcome of the battle is still unknown. Therefore, our top priority is to evacuate as many people and weapons as possible, especially the cannons. Ironax let out a long sigh. So, this intelligence is really valuable. Who is the author and sender? If the information is correct, then their contributions cannot go unnoticed. After a long silence, Edith handed the crumpled piece of paper to Ironax. There were only a few simple sentences on it. It was written by one of Hill's men before the letter was forwarded. I don't know his name. When we found him, he was no different from an ice cube. On his chest, I found this letter. Chapter 13:12. With the help of the flying messengers, the order to retreat quickly spread from the Cage Mountain. As long as Grey Castle was in power, this order was carried out to the greatest extent. Half a year was enough for the nobles to understand Roland Wimbledon's way of doing things. Even they themselves were surprised by the power they displayed. The seemingly impossible requirements in the past were overcome one by one when they went all out. They encountered difficult problems, thought about difficult problems, and solved difficult problems. The same group of people, under different systems, produced completely different results. Baron Jean Bate was one of them. Looking at the busy atmosphere in his mansion, his heart was filled with a myriad of emotions. He had thought that his family was just a small family lacking in ability and ambition. It was precisely because they did not pose a threat to the Wolf King, the Tusk, or the Redstone Gate that they allowed him to manage the sedimentation bay and maintain the delicate balance between the big families. But now his scholars and subordinates were coordinating the turnover of tens of thousands of people at the port, as well as the dispatch of thousands of ships. Although most of them were fishing boats, even the smallest ships had to dock before they could be loaded and unloaded. The former was equivalent to the total population of a large inland city, while the latter was even more than the number of merchant ships along the coast of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Normally, Baron would never have thought that his family had the ability to control such a big situation. If someone mentioned it, he would only think that the person was either joking or had no idea how complicated management was. But Jean Bate realized that he had not only underestimated his own ability, but also the ability of his clansmen. As long as they were ruthlessly pressured, coupled with the right leadership methods and regulations, it turned out that people could be squeezed out of their astonishing potential. At first, he worked for Grey Castle out of helplessness. After all, the fate of his family was in the hands of Grey Castle, and he had no choice but to do it. But gradually he found that he liked this feeling. With one order, thousands of people would work together to complete the task efficiently and accurately. It was as if this was the true meaning of power. Compared to before, he now had a few more superiors above him, but the concept of holding power in his hands was clearer than before. He believed that his subordinates felt the same, which could be seen from their busy but energetic faces. Leading 10,000 fools was not as good as leading 100 smart people. This was probably Baron's most profound experience. Relying on these systems that were completely different from the aristocratic way of doing things, he could turn people who weren't so smart before into smart people. Then how much power could the truly smart people exert for him? Jean Bate now had no doubt that Roland Wimbledon would eventually become the ruler of the 4 countries. As long as the human race could survive the battle of divine will. Apart from the upper management who were extremely busy, the actions of the people were also very lively. In the past, Grey Castle had always kept its promises and paid its debts during the evacuation operation, so its announcement had a very high prestige. Hearing the news that the First Army offered a high reward to those who helped Grey Castle move soldiers and weapons, everyone who had the ability to get a share of the reward took action. The first to respond were the people who lived by the sea. Sailors who used to rent carriages and specialized in land transportation had all returned to their main business. Then came the fishermen. Since the First Army's offer was based on the number of people and the weight of the goods, and the strait between Archduke Island and the mainland was not wide, many people brought out their ancestral sampans, let alone sloops. Without sails, they could still use oars. As long as they could row back and forth across the strait, they could earn several golden dragon coins. Everyone knew how to calculate this. Therefore, in order to carry more people and goods at once, many multi-body sampans and tandem sampans appeared. Even if they were scrapped after 1 or 2 trips to the sea, it was still very worthwhile. The First Army, except for the requirement that every ship must be equipped with a shelter to block the falling snow, accepted all other tortures. For a time, the sea was filled with ships of all sizes, which looked like ants moving house from afar. Of course, the Witch Union was not idle either. The Seagull made nearly 50 round trips a day, and was the most efficient of all the transportation vehicles. Lightning and Maggie cooperated with the Air Knight to patrol the western area of Archduke Island, and together, they drove away the sporadic devil beasts that occasionally appeared. Molly and Hummingbird, the perfect pair, made the loading and unloading work, which was the most time-consuming, simple and easy. It could be said that without their help, it was impossible to carry out such a huge migration with only the capacity of the docks in the few port cities. People, weapons, engineering equipment. The goods that had taken several weeks to be transported to Archduke Island were almost all moved away in just a few days. According to common sense, such a hasty evacuation would most likely result in a rout. It would be good enough if they could bring people back, and it was inevitable that more than half of the goods would be lost. But the facts showed that the way the goods were transported to Archduke Island was basically the same as the way they were transported back. Throwing away the building materials and some insignificant tools, the final loss rate of weapons, ammunition, and other goods was less than 10%. This astonishing management efficiency allowed everyone to once again understand the overall strength of Grey Castle. As the evacuation neared its end, Sylvie issued the highest level of warning to the command center. Traces of a large number of demons appeared in the red mist area. Almost at the same time, Hacksword saw the observer through the parasitic eye demon. It was as if she had suddenly appeared in his mind, and his every move was crystal clear. It was a female awakened with long green hair. She was also a key target mentioned by Osrook in his report. She had an extremely wide field of vision, and was a great strategic threat to the demons. Only the God's Stone could stop her. He silently memorized her appearance and then looked away. This person stayed in the center of the heavily guarded city. Getting rid of her was a good idea, but it should not be done by him. He was the king's most important general, the king's right-hand man. If he was injured, it would be an irreparable regret for the race, so there was no reason for him to take the risk himself. Moreover, Hacksword had a more important target. According to the Sentinels, the humans had recently been very active along the coast of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, especially Archduke Island. There seemed to be a large number of ships entering and leaving recently. It was obvious that the enemies had their eyes on this natural barrier and had no intention of giving it up. Without a doubt, they would pay a heavy price for this mistake. According to the intelligence obtained from the Everwinter nobles, Grey Castle's army only numbered in the tens of thousands. If they could swallow up the garrison on Archduke Island in one go, it would greatly weaken the human strength. He wanted to prove to the Nightmare Lord and the other senior lords that he, the Sky Lord, was also a senior lord who could lead the Western Front to victory. Chapter 13:13. Ever since the outbreak of the war on the Western Front, the Sky Lord's thinking had changed drastically. His understanding of humans came from various war reports and Holy See meetings. Apart from the obviously contemptuous remarks of the insects, it was common knowledge among the senior lords that the humans lacked enough awakened warriors. The difficulty of their advancement was comparable to that of the humans, but their abilities could not be determined in advance. This made the overall strength of the humans extremely unstable. As for the males without magic power, they were purely extras on the battlefield, equivalent to the inferior members of the race. The latter were completely abandoned after the first battle of Divine Will. They did not even have the right to participate in the war, and could only be used as laborers at most. From this, one could see the huge difference in strength between the two races. The Skysea realm had evolved even more thoroughly. Be it the ships that devoured continents or the most basic warriors, they all had highly similar magic power. It was as though they were specially designed for war. Even the demonic beasts that were eroded and controlled by them would grow into demonic bodies. They were undoubtedly the strongest of the four races. Because of this, after the end of the Second Battle of Divine Will, the upper echelons saw the legacy shard of the humans as theirs. This was also the reason why Osruk's last words caused an uproar in the presiding Holy See. But now Haxord increasingly felt that it might not be an exaggeration. If the humans' unimaginable use of fire was not enough to raise the king's vigilance, then the discovery of the enemy's new weapon 2 weeks ago was a completely different matter. A human male, an individual that was seen as an extra, flew into the sky on a strange-looking iron bird without the help of a witch. When it first heard the news, its first reaction was that it was impossible. Since ancient times, apart from birds and beasts, the sky had always been the domain of those who possessed magic power. In addition to the saying that God came from beyond the sky, it made the sky above even more sacred. How could those races that did not even have magic power be involved in this sacred domain? However, there were more than one witness. Haxord, who had just accepted this with great difficulty, realized that the humans' advancement might not only be related to fire. That's right, it was beginning to lean towards Silent Disaster's shocking advancement theory. Perhaps the Nightmare Lord had realized this possibility earlier than it did, which was why she decided to enter the realm of mind to seek the answer. After all, the rate at which humans evolved was just too fast. After all, Osruk's report did not contain any information about the Iron Bird. If they had such a weapon back then, there was no reason for them to hide it until now. The only explanation was that, in less than a year's time, the changes of the human race had almost spread from the ground to the sky. Such a huge change could only be explained by leveling up. Once males could also become the main force of war, humanity's combat potential would undoubtedly increase greatly. Perhaps this was the true warning contained in Osruk's final message. Fortunately, compared to fire, Haxord was much more familiar with the sky, and the Iron Bird created by the other party was not much stronger than the devil beasts. As long as it was here, the sky would not allow anyone else to touch it. The attack this time would not suffer a setback like the last time. This confidence was by no means contempt. At this point, it would be foolish to underestimate the enemy. Its confidence came from its name, because it was the ruler of the sky. After passing through the door, Sky Lord had already appeared at the edge of the island. Along with him was the parasitic eye demon. If eye demons were a rare species, then the parasitic eye demon was an even rarer and precious resource. This technology was inspired by the underground civilization. It required the sacrifice of an ascended person to fuse with the eye demon. Once it succeeded, the former would become an empty shell that contained the soul, while the latter would gain the ability to move freely. Despite the high price, Haxord did not hesitate to send it to the front lines and let it follow him. This was the only way to restrain the other important target that Osruk had mentioned, a witch who could attack from an extremely long distance. Even when it landed on the island, the image of the witch did not appear in its mind. This meant that the only opponent that could threaten it was not on the island. At the same time, it did not notice anyone looking in its direction. There was no better time than now. Haxord did not hesitate any longer and decisively opened the complete form of the distortion door. A large black hole opened up behind him and quickly extended to a width of dozens of steps. Any natural defenses became meaningless in front of this door. Red mist gushed out, and the high-ascended Siasis was the first to appear in front of him. "My lord, your troops are ready. Pass down my orders. Seize this island and kill all those who resist." "As you wish." Siasis let out a shrill cry. As a psionic warlock who had experienced 3 ascension ceremonies, this cry was enough to make any human who did not wear a godstone collapse on the spot. Even if they did, they would fall into a trance from the mental attack. At the same time, it was also a signal to attack. After the cry, a large number of primal demons and symbiotic demons swarmed out of the distortion door and pounced towards the center of the island. The strength of the humans' fire crossbows lay in their extremely long range. As long as they could close the distance, these new symbiotic demons would definitely be able to break through the enemy's defenses. Soon, the vanguard troops crossed the outer perimeter of the island and approached the human town. However, there was no sound of gunfire. This caused Haxord to feel a little surprised. It had not been easy to place the enemy on the same level as the race. What was with this oversight? Could it be that they still did not realize that their position had been invaded? "My lord." After a quarter of an hour, Siasis hurried back. "The inner city has been occupied, but we did not discover any traces of humans. It's already an empty city." "What did you say?" Haxord stared. "There are still many unfinished buildings in the city. From the looks of it, they seem to have been erected not too long ago. I'm afraid they abandoned Archduke Island a day or 2 ago." So, the ships that the Sentinels had observed were not transporting troops to the island, but were instead speeding up the evacuation? But how was this possible? The humans' actions were as if they knew that he was about to attack Archduke Island. The problem was that he had deliberately ordered his army to avoid all the towns and cities, and every route of advance had been inspected by I-demons. The ones who were most likely to leak information were the human laborers. He had even ordered his subordinates to concentrate on watching over them, cutting off all possibility of communication with the outside world. Even if the other party had noticed something was wrong, they should not have retreated so quickly. How did the news leak out? Before he could properly ponder this question, a deafening explosion suddenly erupted in the center of the island. In an instant, the entire ground shook violently. Chapter 13-14. Haxord closed the distortion door with a livid expression. Even the stupidest person would have no doubt that they had been completely tricked by the humans. "These worms!" Siasis roared furiously. The frantically wriggling whiskers on his cheeks betrayed the murderous intent in his heart. "Shut up!" Haxord interrupted him. "If they are worms, then what are we, who were tricked by the worms? From today onwards, I don't want to hear the term worm ever again." He then leaped up and flew towards the other end of Archduke Island. The thick black smoke continued to billow upwards, forming an extremely thick pillar of smoke. Below it, there were faint flashes of fire, as though magma was spewing out from underground. The city was in a mess. Even in places that were not affected by the fireball, there were many primal demons lying around. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. But this was not his focus. The truth had already happened. Staying here would not reduce the losses and would only increase his anger. If he had the time, he might as well make the enemy pay a higher price. On the south side of the island, Skylord indeed saw a few ships that had not gone far. Even though they had their sails up, they were basically motionless in front of his ability. Just as it was about to cross this distance in one step, a flash of light below attracted its attention. He saw a figure flying out from the periphery of Archduke Island and quickly heading south. So that was it. He thought that the person who ignited the flames had died along with the vanguard. He did not expect that the humans were planning to retreat, letting the witches carry out the detonation mission, and then easily retreat from the battlefield? How could it be so simple? Skylord immediately changed his target. He opened a distortion door and instantly appeared before the witches. It was a female with short light blonde hair. Her face instantly revealed a look of surprise, as though she did not expect him to suddenly appear. Hacksword did not want to say anything else. He directly reached out to grab her, but his grab did not touch anything. The female in front of him suddenly burst forth with unbelievable speed. In the blink of an eye, she was already hundreds of feet away. At the same time, the air she stirred up slammed into Hacksword and the parasitic eye demons like a wall. For a moment, the magic barrier glistened, and the ripples only subsided after a while. The witch slowed down after flying for a distance, as if she had consumed a lot of energy. It snorted coldly and gave chase again. It was another step away. This time, when it stepped out of the distortion door, the other party had already flown far away, leaving a trail of white fog behind him. Hacksword was enraged and used its ability for the third time. This time, it directly positioned the door 1,000 feet in front of her, wanting to see where she would run to this time. However, the moment it stepped out of the door, it suddenly felt a large number of eyes focused on it. It was as if it had suddenly arrived at the center of the city from an empty place. Skylord was taken aback as he looked towards the source of the gazes. He saw black figures approaching from the direction of the sea line and land. Among them were iron birds and witches. Was this a premeditated ambush? So she was purposely stopping to make me think that she was limited by magic power, and could only fly for a short period of time? Humans, ha ha ha. Hacksword was so angry that it laughed. Not only had they schemed against its army, but they were also preparing to scheme against it? If it retreated now, it would only take a single thought. But it did not do so. Yes, it was not a magic slayer. This was something it had always taken to heart. But that did not mean that a male wearing a god stone of retaliation could surpass a senior lord. It wanted to let the other party know who was the true ruler of the sky. In the blink of an eye, 8 iron birds were already in front of it, their heads spewing a series of flames. Hacksword waved one hand and opened a distortion door in front of him, swallowing the iron crossbows. At the same time, he opened the other side of the door beside the iron birds. After the fatal crossbows passed through the door, they swept straight to where they came from. In an instant, several iron birds were hit, and the formation was thrown into chaos. But what surprised him was that the iron crossbows, which were supposed to be fatal, did not cause the iron birds to fall apart on the spot. Instead, they only left a few holes in their bodies. Skylord quickly put this surprise to the back of his mind. He took a step up high and trampled the entire battlefield beneath his feet. The iron birds were clearly unable to keep up with his figure. Even though they began to climb upwards, their clumsy movements were even slower than worms. Just as he was about to tear them apart one by one, a passing bird suddenly transformed into a devil beast and bit at him. The eye demon did not treat the common birds on the sea as a threat at all. Hacksword quickly dodged the sneak attack. He opened his palm angrily, and a black light immediately appeared between the two of them. It was also a distortion door, but it was only as wide as a finger. The part of his body that passed through the door would obviously not be left with the rest of his body. As if realizing that a great disaster was imminent, the devil beast shrank back into a seabird in the blink of an eye. But it was obviously difficult to stop in such a short distance. Half of her wings still brushed past the black line, and the wingtip and feathers that were cut off instantly blossomed like snowflakes. But before he could deliver the final blow, a rumbling sound rang out again. The blonde witch transformed into a dazzling golden light and charged straight at him. Hacksword, who did not have time to repeat the same trick, could only muster all the magic power in his body and transform it into a strong shield that covered his entire body. Bang! The two crashed into each other, and the huge impact caused the golden light on the witch's body to explode into countless fragments. It also made Hacksword feel suffocated. But the witch's injuries were obviously more serious. Not only was there blood at the corner of her mouth, but one of her arms was also broken into several pieces. But the witch completely disregarded her injuries. Her other remaining hand had already pulled out a short fire stick from her waist. Damn it! He had no choice but to open another distortion door. If the witch shot at him, the iron crossbow would only hit her partner. But what made Hacksword anxious was that this attack was only a feint. The witch did not fire at him, but instead accelerated downwards and hugged the falling seabird. "I'm going to grind all of you into powder," Hacksword roared for the first time since the start of the battle. But just at this moment, the sharpest warning sounded in Skylord's mind. It came from a large iron bird that descended from the clouds. In the Eye Demon's vision, the source was the witch that Osrook had mentioned. Hacksword felt himself being locked by something. With a heightened sense of danger, Hacksword expanded the distortion door to its maximum size, covering the witch's entire attack range. But the parasitic Eye Demon pushed him hard. Then there was a flash of fire. After what seemed like a long time, but also like a short moment, a black shadow flashed past like lightning. Countless cracks appeared on the distortion door, and then it shattered like glass. Then it was the parasitic Eye Demon who pushed him away. The blue light on his body flickered and extinguished. Blood, flesh, and organs spurted out, raising a blue mist amidst the falling snow. Both happened almost at the same time, so fast that Hacksword could not react at all. Finally, it was his turn. Even though the attacking god's stone had been shattered, it still cut off half of his palm and left a few dents on his armor. The disorder of magic caused him to lose control of his body, and he fell straight towards the sea. At this moment, the iron birds had already turned around and were pouncing towards him. After escaping from the anti-magic zone, Hacksword used the last of his strength to open a new door beneath him. Chapter 13-15. My lord. When Siassi saw Skylord again, he could not believe his eyes. He was dripping wet, as if he had just been fished out of the water. He looked extremely exhausted, and there were wounds all over his body. Half of his armor was stained with blue blood, as if he had just gone through a fierce battle. The parasitic Eye Demon that followed the Grand Lord was nowhere to be found. As the most sensitive sentinel, it was only useful when it was beside a Grand Lord. The current situation could only mean that the Eye Demon had most likely met with misfortune. If the opponent was from the Sky Sea realm, such a scene could be understood, but the opponent was clearly those insects, humans. Hacksword was in no mood to explain. He grabbed his subordinate and dragged him into the distortion door. The next moment, they were back in the red mist zone. Lord Skylord, the warriors on the island. Siassi quickly reacted, and his expression changed. Although the sudden explosion in the city had caused the vanguard to suffer heavy losses, at least a portion of them had survived. Their departure was equivalent to abandoning all of them on Archduke Island. Furthermore, there was a limit to the amount of red mist the vanguard could carry, and they would not last more than a few days. I can no longer open a new door. Hacksword's words caused the high-ranked psionic warlock to shut his mouth. At any time, the value of a primal demon was far inferior to a Grand Lord. Given the two evils, there was no need to think too much about the choice. I will escort you back to Sky City. Inform Totolok first. Let the humans use sailboats to bring back the vanguard on the island. Bring as many as you can. As for the symbiotic demons, let them hide where they are. Skylord gritted his teeth. Once the red mist covers Archduke Island, the main force will immediately launch an attack on Sedimentation Bay and other places. The two of you will be in charge of the battle. My lord, isn't this a little too hasty? Siassi asked in surprise. It won't be too late to attack after you recover from your injuries. This is my order. You don't have to say anything else. Yes, I've overstepped. He hurriedly lowered his head. As you wish. Watching his subordinate leave, Hacksword clenched his remaining hand tightly. How could he not know that this was a little hasty? However, it was better than letting the humans drag things out. For the first time, the Sky Lord realized that time was not on their side. The speed at which the humans absorbed the inheritance was faster than he had imagined. Within a year, the humans could threaten a senior lord with just a few witches and magicless males. What would happen in a few years? They could not give the humans any chance to breathe. The Western Front must be back on track. Several days later, Haxord finally returned to the bottom of the Great Rift Valley. Currently, this place was filled with dense red mist. Just by staying here, he could feel his spirit improving, and the pain from his palms had lessened significantly. It went straight to the red mist pond at the bottom of the birth tower. Looking at the motionless Nightmare Lord, the Sky Lord was instantly infuriated. If she had not been immersed in the realm of mind, he would not have ended up in such a sorry state. Everything should not have turned out this way. If he had focused on relocating his troops, the advancement of the front line would not have been so slow. If the Nightmare Lord had led the troops to fight, none of the Grey Castle soldiers would have been able to escape the northern lands. Then, while the humans were panicking, he would launch a frontal attack. At the same time, he would lead the troops from the west to attack the Hermes Plateau. This was the Western Front's strategy. Although he was angry, when it came to pulling the Nightmare Lord out of the realm of mind, Haxord revealed a look of hesitation. After all, the Nightmare Lord was an existence that he could only look up to in the past. In fact, he had once thought that the Nightmare Lord would become the king of his race. No. Haxord shook his head. He was loyal to the king, but this was just an ignorant thought he had when he participated in the promotion ceremony. In terms of level, the Nightmare Lord was essentially no different from him. At most, he would have a deeper understanding of the realm of mind. He made up his mind. This might hurt the Nightmare Lord's memory, and it might cause him to go into a rage of thunder. It might even cut off the clues to the mystery of the humans' promotion, but that was not as important as the war on the Western Front. At most, he would stand on Silent Disaster's side during the Holy See meeting, and admit to the promotion theory. As for where the legacy shard came from, he could research it after the victory. As long as he could devour the humans' legacy shard, then everything they had now would become a stepping stone for their race. With this in mind, Haxord took a deep breath and suddenly pushed the Nightmare Lord. The magic in his palm would break the connection between the Nightmare Lord and the realm of mind, pulling it out of the origin of magic. In theory, that was the case. However, the Nightmare Lord did not open its eyes. Its body fell to the side like an empty shell in the red mist pond. Haxord instantly felt fear choking his throat. Even when its consciousness was almost destroyed by the uncontrollable magic during the promotion ceremony, or when it was ambushed by the Sky Sea realm, it had never been so frightened. He took a step forward and helped the Nightmare Lord up. He tried to capture its consciousness, but all he got was emptiness. Life did not end, but eternal slumber. This was the characteristic of being lost in the realm of mind. And once one sank into the endless Red Sea, there was no possibility of returning. Even if one could maintain a moment of lucidity, it would sooner or later be eroded by the chaotic consciousness, until it became a part of the realm of mind. Skylord's heart immediately sank to the bottom. This meant that they had lost the Nightmare Lord. How did this happen? With the Nightmare Lord's ability, as long as it acted cautiously and did not make any mistakes, it should not have been trapped in the realm of mind. What exactly did it encounter during its exploration? Skylord did not dare to think any further. He got up and ran to the top of the tower, even throwing his injuries to the back of his mind. He had to inform the king of this news immediately. The situation on the Western Front had changed drastically. How's everyone's recovery? In the command post at Cage Mountain, Iron Axe looked at Agatha and asked with concern, "With Nana around, what problem can there be?" The latter put away the sigil of listening and shook her head with a smile. It was obvious that she was in a good mood. According to Vendi, Maggie recovered to the extent of being alive and kicking on the same day, while Lightning only recovered the next day. Both of them have now resumed patrolling the front lines. The only regret is that I did not participate in this ambush. We were taking a risk after all. Besides, in order to carry that giant flintlock, even the seats on the Seagull were completely dismantled, not to mention carrying an extra person. Iron Axe also smiled. I thought your regret would be not being able to kill that senior demon in one fell swoop. To be able to defeat a senior lord with such a lineup is already an impressive victory. Agatha turned to the Pearl of the Northern region and placed her hand on her chest. I underestimated you in the past, and reality has proven that it was indeed a mistake. Other than His Majesty, there are many outstanding people among the magicless ones who should not be underestimated. Edith accepted the bow calmly. As the person who planned the entire ambush, she didn't need to show any modesty at this time. Chapter 13-16. As a senior demon lord, the Sky Lord's abilities were indeed astonishing. Using magic power to open up a spatial passageway could allow him to move quickly, and could also be used as a shield or weapon. However, upon careful analysis, one would realize that it wasn't flawless. First, we can confirm that this senior demon can only open one passage at a time, and the entrance is within its reach. Edith said, "It's hard to determine the limit of the other side, but it should be at least 2 kilometers. It sounds like an enhanced version of trajectory." After interacting with Roland for a long time, Agatha had also learned many strange terms from him, such as enhanced version, special enhanced version, enhanced version, and so on, just based on the distance. That is indeed the case. The Pearl of the Northern region nodded. However, the number of passageways created by the trajectory depends on the amount of magic power. As for Skylord, he has to close the previous passageway before he can open a new one. The situation at the time was so urgent that it couldn't possibly hide anything. This is very important because it determines our basic response. If the enemy can use more than one passage at the same time, the situation will become 100 times more complicated. After the two of them digested the information, she continued. Another key point is that although the entrance and exit of the passage can be scaled freely, Hacksword must stand near the door to maintain its existence. According to Miss Sylvie's observation, when the Archduke Island exploded, it took a few seconds to close the gate before flying to the south of the island. This means that, the wider the door is opened, the slower it will close? Ironax said thoughtfully. Very likely so. Edith spread out her hands and said. And the last point is its Achilles heel. Hacksword is not a magic slayer, so he can neither restrain the witches nor pose a threat to those who wear God's stones of retaliation. Even though its body was not weaker than an extraordinaire's, it would still be trapped in the anti-magic domain if it fought in close combat. I don't think it would be willing to exchange its life for 2 or 3 humans. At this point she paused. In summary, the Sky Lord's main ability is to open up a 2-way passageway with him as the center, and a radius of several kilometers. Furthermore, only one passageway is allowed to exist at a time. Whether it's the front or the back, as long as both sides of the door are affected by the God Stone, the passage will collapse. So, if it appears again, our response plan is, if it's at the outer edge of the camp, and the exit of the door isn't facing the camp, just let Miss Sylvie direct the artillery to cover it. Edith said methodically, if the exit of the door is inside the encampment, or if it directly uses the small door to rush into the encampment of the First Army, the soldiers don't have to do anything. Just leave it to the professionals. Nothing. Iron Axe was a little surprised at first, and then he said, I see. That's right. Edith smiled. In fact, the Sky Lord's most effective method of attack is to use our firearms to kill ourselves. Once the soldiers are able to hold back, its threat to the position will be limited. As I said before, this ability is almost irreplaceable for strategic deployment, but it is not a good choice for attacking. Faced with the First Army's front line that ignored it, the senior demon lord couldn't possibly charge into the trenches and engage in close combat with the soldiers. If that happened, when the professionals, the heavily armored God's punishment witches, arrived, it would only be a dead end. What if the First Army uses the gap between the artillery attacks to counterattack? Agatha asked after a moment of silence. For example, it first opens a passage to the outside, making us think that it's transporting troops. But after firing the cannons, it opens a new door, aiming the exit at the encampment. This way, we might be attacked by our own cannons. The fact that she could think of this was enough to prove that the Ice Witch had put a lot of effort into Greycastle's new weapon. This is indeed a feasible method in theory, but I don't think the Sky Lord will do that, Edith explained. A door that allows a single person to pass through can be completed in the blink of an eye. but it will take time to expand it to a huge door that can completely protect him. The time difference between the two is extremely limited, and if he fails, he will be blasted into smithereens by the artillery shells that fall behind him. For a senior demon lord, this is too risky. All in all, I can understand that the Sky Lord's threat to the frontline isn't as great as previously thought, right? Iron Axe said while stroking his chin. That's the General Staff's current conclusion. Edith gave an affirmative answer. Of course, this is only if Hacksword is leading the troops in battle alone. If there are other senior demons cooperating with him, the danger level will instantly increase by several times. For example, leading Osrook directly to the center of the encampment. Iron Axe and Agatha could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the latter had already died on the fertile plains. But we can't rule out the possibility of a new magic slayer appearing, so if possible, it's best to find a chance to get rid of this trouble. The Pearl of the Northern Region's tone carried a hint of murderous intent. Only when he completely disappears can he truly be considered a threat. Hearing this, Agatha could not help but feel a little emotional. A mortal not only had no fear of demons, but was also plotting a way to kill a senior demon lord. In the past, this would have sounded like a fantasy, but now no one found it strange, as if it was a matter of course. Humans had indeed changed a lot in the past 400 years, be it humans or objects. Perhaps the Union's silence was not all bad. At least they did not carry on the fear of powerful enemies from that era to this era. Now that she thought about it, there might have been many ordinary people who had the same potential as Edith Kant during the Union's era. It was just that the pessimism and fear that spread throughout the race had shackled their thoughts and wills. Coupled with the deliberate estrangement created by the upper echelons, that era as a whole seemed gloomy. And this time, before humans tasted true despair, Roland Wimbledon stopped it from spreading. As her emotions surged, she once again recalled the scene when she first met Roland when she woke up from her long slumber in the ice coffin. Everything started from the sentence, "Even mortals can defeat demons." Hacksword probably won't fall for the same trap twice. Do you have any good ideas? Iron Axe asked. As long as the First Army is agile enough, even without setting up a trap, they can still find an opportunity to kill the other party. For example, equipping the Fire of Heaven with a large caliber weapon that can shoot God's stones. That's true, the Commander-in-Chief muttered. But that requires a lot of God's stone bullets. Have you already thought of a way to process God's stones? Impossible. Ah, Edith shrugged. I'm just a chief of staff, not a god. It's fine to give suggestions, but as for how to implement it, I'll naturally leave it to His Majesty to figure out. Don't worry, I've written all these things in the battle report. In order for the front lines to achieve victory, he should also do his best. The other two could not help but twitch the corners of their mouths. Chapter 13-17. Greycastle, City of Neverwinter. 2 days later, Roland received a report on the battle on Archduke Island and the situation in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Compared to the previous time when it took a week to send a letter from Evernight City in the northern region to Neverwinter, this speed was a huge improvement. Regardless of whether it was the short-distance express delivery of air messengers or the long-distance travel of steamships day and night, they were now all part of the information transmission system. Every important message would be sent by a special person, a special ship, or even a plane. And this time, the report was sent by Tilly. Thank you for your hard work. Roland handed her a chaos drink. How's the situation over there? Won't you know after reading the report? Tilly took the cup and glanced at him. You're so attentive. Why are you feeling guilty? Is it because you still don't have a clue about my dedicated computer? Pfft. Nightingale's stifled laughter came from behind him. How could that be? I've already chosen the most suitable one from several plans. As soon as Anna has time, we can start the trial production immediately. Roland hurriedly said, You know, several projects have reached the most critical stage recently. She's really too busy. For Anna's sake, I won't argue with you this time, brother. Tilly drank the drink in one gulp, wiped her mouth, and walked out of the office. The Seagull will be returning soon. I'll return to the Air Knight Academy first. Not even for a day. Roland was slightly surprised. I have no choice. Right now, the only things that can threaten the Sky Lord are the Seagull and Andrea. Also, I don't want to miss any opportunity for revenge. Tilly waved her hand with her back facing him. Then I'll be going, brother. Looking at the closed door, Nightingale sighed softly. Everyone is working hard. If possible, I would rather they work hard in other areas than war. This thought emerged in Roland's mind, but he did not say it out loud. Before the end of the Battle of Divine Will, before the fate of mankind was decided, no one could rest from this heavy burden. There was no point in saying this now, other than avoiding responsibility. After a moment of silence, he broke the seal on the report. After reading all the reports, Roland finally understood what Tilly meant. Edith, Kant and Andrea were undoubtedly the greatest heroes of this battle. Being able to issue the order to retreat in time and successfully ambush a Grand Lord that came and went without a trace on the vast sea. But at the same time, the sender of that crucial intelligence couldn't be ignored. Without this person's desperate move, they wouldn't have been able to win. What do you plan to do? This matter had obviously attracted Nightingale's attention. Regardless of the original intention of sending this secret letter, this person's name and achievements shouldn't be forgotten, Roland said in a deep voice. If it was in his previous life, it would have been almost impossible to find an unknown spy after the long war. The only thing that could be left on the tombstone was an inscription that read, "No one knows your name, but your achievements will last forever." However, witches could change this unavoidable situation, and let every soldier who contributed to the fate of mankind leave their name in the long river of history. When the kingdom of Everwinter is under the control of the First Army again, let Black Money cooperate with Summer to confirm his identity and origin. If the murderer who killed him was still alive at that time, he would definitely not be able to escape the severe punishment of the law. Nightingale nodded. It would be great if the equipment that you mentioned could be manufactured earlier to allow communication across thousands of miles. Unfortunately, that's not my forte. Roland could not help but rub his forehead. Whenever he thought of the circuit diagram that he had forcibly memorized, he felt an incomparable headache. Now you can finally understand how I felt during the exam, Nightingale said while covering her mouth. But no matter how difficult it is, I won't fall asleep on the table like someone and hand in a blank paper in the end. Roland glared at her. In fact, I've almost completed the manufacturing of the prototype. That's right. Although the progress was extremely slow, the radio project had never stopped. Like the piston engine, after considering many plans from the design bureau of Grey Castle, he decided to choose two of them to work on at the same time. These two were the spark transmitter and the amplitude modulation transmitter. The former was the ancestor of radio communication. Its structure was extremely simple and did not have any electronic components. It only used the voltage transformer coil to increase the voltage to charge the capacitor until the voltage between the spark gap of the capacitor was high enough to break through the air and release electric sparks. This part was quite similar to a lighter, except that the electric current transmitted by the spark was not wasted. Instead, it repeatedly oscillated between the capacitor and the inductor, producing electromagnetic waves that were finally transmitted through the antenna. In other words, as long as the power was switched on and off, it could emit intermittent electromagnetic waves. The listener could translate it into the corresponding signal based on the length of the sound. This was the origin of the long and short telegraph codes. Although it still sounded a bit confusing, Roland used the most ingenious method, which was to first let the design bureau of Grey Castle's wireless project team use readily available materials to build a usable real thing, and then copy the real thing. For example, 2 pieces of tin foil were clamped on a stack of oiled paper, and then sealed with wax, which was a simple high-voltage capacitor. The inductor was even simpler. It was nothing more than wrapping a coil of wire around an insulating tube. Without considering mass production or specifications, Roland could complete the equipment by himself. Although compared to the sealed industrial products that were only the size of a fingernail, they looked thick and crude, the effect was basically the same. When the transmission tower was built, he could attempt the first wireless transmission experiment of this era. However, the shortcomings of the spark transmitter were also very obvious. Even if it passed the test, to be put into official use, he still had to design a set of code that matched the kingdom's language. The training of the transmitter and receiver would also take a lot of time. In addition, the spectrum of the spark transmitter was extremely wide, and only one transmitter could work in the same range. It was not suitable for frontline intelligence personnel to use. Therefore, his ultimate goal was still the amplitude modulation transmitter that used electron tubes to amplify the signal. And the biggest advantage of the latter was that it could directly transmit voice signals. In principle, radio communication and telephone were essentially very similar. They both converted the vibration of sound into electric current or electromagnetic wave changes, and after long-distance transmission to the other end, it was converted back into sound. However, the frequency of the human voice was too low, causing the wavelength of the signal to be too long. The longer the wavelength, the larger the size of the antenna needed. If the voice signal was directly transmitted, the antenna length would probably be more than 100 kilometers, which was impossible in engineering. Therefore, if he wanted to transmit the voice, he had to ride on a carrier with a higher frequency. This was the so-called modulation. After the new waveform of the two was accepted, the receiver also had to use a series of demodulation methods to filter out the high-frequency waves, leaving only the meaningful low-frequency waves, which could be converted into the final voice. Once the amplitude modulation transmitter was successful, both the First Army and the intelligence agency would truly have the ability to communicate in real time. Chapter 13:18. Of course, the difficulty of the two types of wireless communication equipment was not on the same level. At least, the core component of the latter, the electron tube, was still being trial-produced by the Ministry of Engineering. The failed products had already piled up into a small hill outside the laboratory. As for the proposal to modify the fire of heaven mentioned in Edith's report, Roland was rather tempted. From a technical point of view, it was not difficult to transplant a 35mm sniper cannon onto a biplane. All he had to do was bury the entire cannon under the belly of the plane and remove the shooter's seat. If the number of bullets was limited to 10, a balance could be achieved in terms of weight, and there was no need to make any other changes. The problem was that to obtain large godstone bullets, he had to use the blood of witches or demons to dissolve and separate the godstone vein, until he obtained a godstone of retaliation of appropriate size and shape. Only then could he proceed with further processing. If it was too big, the existing knives and lathes would be useless. If it was too small, the godstone would be too brittle. The process of selecting the base material would consume a lot of magic blood. Even if the witch union and sleeping spell supported his idea, the amount would not be enough to satisfy the needs of the war. To truly solve this problem, he had to think of a solution from the demons. First, he had to find out how they could process large godstone pillars. Second, he had to use their blood to create them. Now that the fire of heaven could return to Neverwinter from the front line within a day, coupled with Agatha's refrigeration ability, it was not impossible to directly transport fresh demon blood from the battlefield. Roland silently recorded the proposal on the agenda. At night, he entered the dream world as usual. In order to speed up the progress of the Greycastle Design Bureau's project, Roland had greatly increased the number of times he entered the dream world in the past month. This caused the dream world, which was originally lagging behind the real world, to catch up. The city, which was previously in late summer and early autumn, was now covered in snowflakes. It was as if this and the outside world were just different regions of the same world. The tube-shaped apartment district was still busy in the morning. The expansion of the erosion and the destruction of the Prism City did not affect the residents at all. Breakfast stalls were still on both sides of the streets. People hurriedly walked through the streets, and the snow that had accumulated overnight was already covered with footprints. Even though Mist claimed that this world was also facing a battle of divine will, it was undoubtedly much more peaceful than the battlefield in the kingdom of Wolfheart that was filled with red mist. In addition, the long period of time in the dream did not only bring about the change of seasons, but also the mental state of the demon transmigrator. After a period of surveillance and observation, Roland could basically confirm that the demon who called herself Valkyries was not a native of the Kargard Peninsula. Although the Martialist Association verified that there was indeed such a person among the visiting group from the peninsula, her behavior could not be explained with common sense. Roland was no stranger to the phenomenon of his true identity changing internally, because he himself was an example. Using the word transmigrator to describe him was undoubtedly the most appropriate way of describing him. In the beginning, Valkyries was still able to maintain her disguise, or rather, act like an ordinary martialist, such as flipping through various books and not speaking as much as possible. But as time passed, she gradually became more and more impatient. Especially after her injuries healed, she sneaked into the depths of the Prism City and stood in front of the erosion breach in silence. According to Donan's report, at that time, Valkyries' face showed obvious anxiety, as if she was longing for something. She even thought several times that Valkyries was about to jump into the erosion breach, but in the end, she restrained herself. It would be too far-fetched to say that she was mourning the death of her companions, because Valkyries did not even stay at the place where the visiting group had been killed. She had come for the erosion breach from the very beginning. It was not difficult to understand the change in her mentality if she were in Roland's shoes. Coming from the city of demons to this completely unfamiliar modern city, he might have been able to remain calm at first, wanting to figure out where exactly this place was. However, as time dragged on, and the hope of returning was still slim, anxiety was unavoidable. Perhaps the real reason Valkyries sneaked into the Prism City was to see if she could return to the world she was familiar with through the breach. Unfortunately, the memory fragments did not go as she wished. In any case, it was extremely difficult to disguise herself to this extent. After all, Valkyries did not know that her every move was being watched by Donan. If it were not for these private details, Roland would have thought that her disguise was almost flawless based on her communication with other martialists. Roland knew that if he were in Valkyrie's shoes, he would never be able to do this. Now that Valkyrie's identity had been confirmed, the next step was how to deal with it. At this time he received a text message on his cell phone. It was from Phyllis. "Your Majesty, everyone is ready." Roland put his cell phone into his pocket, stood up and walked into the living room. Zero was busy putting egg noodles on the table. Seeing Roland, she put her hands on her hips and said, "Uncle, you haven't forgotten what you promised me, have you? Why? Are you afraid that I'll sneak away? It's not the first time you've done that," she said with a pout. "Don't worry, I won't this time." Roland walked up to her with a smile and patted her head. "Let's have breakfast first. After that, we'll call Sister Garcia next door, and then we'll set off together." Apart from the Spring Festival, the most popular event this winter was the quadrennial martial arts contest. For all the junior and senior high school students in the city, anyone who could go to watch the contest would definitely become the center of attention. Zero, who was not very interested in this kind of competition, was not immune to it. After a lot of begging, Roland had no choice but to agree to take her to experience it up close after the winter vacation. Considering that today's contest was under the watch of the Guardian, and was in the round-robin stage, it was unlikely that a fallen evil would appear. Besides, Zero had to return to her hometown during the long holidays. As the little girl's only request, Roland could not refuse. Moreover, it would be more convenient for him to act with her. Roland decided to face the demon traveler. It was already the 4th month. Valkyries seemed to be staring at the noisy arena, but his mind was not on it at all. 4 months had given it a basic understanding of this world, and it had also allowed it to learn about the various legacies of humans. In a sense, it had also become a part of the inheritors. As long as he could return to the real world, he would definitely be able to benefit his race greatly. However, the most fatal problem was that he still could not find a way to leave the realm of mind. Valkyries had a lot of important information, but there was no one to pass it on to. It was like finding a bottle of spring water in the desert with great difficulty, only to find that the bottle was sealed shut. Whether it was sending out a call for help to Hacksword, or trying to sense the traces of the king, he could not get any response. Even when he was meditating at the opening of the realm of mind, the realm of mind did not respond to his call. This was the first time he encountered such a situation. Valkyries could not help but hate the Sky Lord. Chapter 13:19. If everything went smoothly on the Western Front, the red mist should have already crossed the ridge of the continent and infiltrated the human territory. This meant that the birth tower in the Great Rift Valley was no longer a secret. No matter how slow the opponent was, they should have realized it. But why was Hacksword still indifferent? Could it be that the humans were so weak that it could deal with them alone? Valkyries felt that it was impossible. If the opponent was so weak, Osrook would not have been defeated on the fertile plains. It knew that the long isolation had caused it to lose the ability to judge the situation. This experience made the Nightmare Lord feel extremely uneasy. And that human? It looked at the other end of the arena and saw Roland accompanying two females, watching the competition with interest. Damn it. Didn't he have something important to do? If he had a way to leave this place, then it might be its only chance. The inheritance and knowledge of the humans were undoubtedly brought out of this world by him. He must have some kind of communication channel with the outside world. As long as he left the realm of mind, it would have a chance to seize that opportunity. After all, in the king's presiding Holy See, it had sensed the connection between the king and the territory many times. It was also because of this ability that it dared to follow the fluctuations of the inheritance shard and search for traces of Roland in the depths of the realm of mind. However, the other party had always been active in this world and did not give it any chance to take advantage of him. Could the human king be so idle that he did not care about politics for a few months? He would rather waste time on the meaningless martial arts tournament than read a few books. The only explanation was that there was too little pressure on the front line. So this was still Hacksword's fault. Just as its emotions were fluctuating, Valkyries suddenly noticed that Roland had left the two and walked to a corner alone. There was a hooded female standing there, as if she was deliberately waiting for him. She pretended to be indifferent as she walked out of the crowd, but her eyes were fixed on Roland. After a brief conversation, the female pointed in the direction of the exit. Roland seemed to be a little hesitant, but finally nodded. Did the association discover something? Valkyries had planned to stop there, but for some reason, it felt that the female had a familiar aura. It was precisely this strange feeling that made it take a few more steps forward and take a closer look. It was this one glance that made Valkyries' hair stand on end. Under the dim light, it saw a face similar to Heftali's, or rather, the Martialist Association's lawn. Could it be that the Transformer had always been hiding in this world? And the reason why Roland could enter and exit this place as a male human was also because of it? This news was too shocking. Valkyries could no longer suppress the impulse in her heart and quickly followed. After passing through the safety passage, Roland and the suspected shapeshifter did not walk out of the arena. Instead, they turned and entered the underground garage. The King of Nightmares tried to lighten his footsteps and followed them from a distance until they entered a civil air defense refuge passage. When Valkyries followed them, she found that the passage was no more than 10 meters long and there were no forks in it. At the end of the passage was a closed concrete wall with the warning words "Unfinished, no entry" hanging on it. It was a dead end, but the two of them had disappeared without a trace. Oh no, it's a trap! Valkyries reacted instantly, but it was too late. Before it could turn around and retreat, Roland had already appeared behind it, blocking the only way. And there were several females standing beside him. Seeing the way they used their abilities, which were completely different from martialists, Valkyries did not even have the slightest hope left. There was no doubt that the people standing beside him were all witches. Valkyries finally understood where the previous sense of familiarity came from. It was the subtle difference between the magic fluctuations and the force of nature. If witches could also come to this realm of consciousness and possess their original power, then it was only a matter of time before it was exposed. After all, if the other party could quietly hide so many people to set up an ambush, it would be a piece of cake for them to sneak around and spy on it. This principle could be understood with just a little thought. All of its camouflage was for surface contact, but it was just a joke in front of witches with strange abilities. Perhaps in the past 4 months, witches had already figured out its whereabouts. "We meet again, Miss Valkyries," Roland said calmly. Valkyries did not speak. Saying anything at this time would only bring disgrace to itself. Although it still could not understand why the other party could also let witches come to this realm, it was no longer important. The other party deliberately set up an ambush in this secluded place, and its purpose was self-evident. The only thing it could do now was to die in battle. The Nightmare Lord stirred up all the magic power in its body and leaned forward slightly. As for the possibility of winning against a group of combat witches without the ability of magic stones and the magic slaying skill, it did not even consider it. No matter what the situation was, it would not surrender to the enemy. How about I buy you a cup of coffee from the Kargard Peninsula? Roland said again. Valkyrie's almost sprained her foot. She froze on the spot, her upper body still in a slanted posture, looking rather stiff. What did you say? Buy you a cup of coffee? Roland repeated again. Although it's not real coffee, but some kind of similar special drink. Valkyrie stared at him for a long time before she asked the question in her heart. Why? She could not figure out what this male was thinking at all. The reality was different from this place. The coexistence of the tribe and humans was just an illusion. Since the other party had confirmed its true origin, he would not let it go. If it did not meet death, it would only meet a fate worse than death. Because some things are better to be open than to hide, Roland said slowly. Especially when the battle of divine will is not the final battle. The battle of divine will is not the final battle. Valkyries could not help but be stunned. She did not expect to hear this from the mouth of a human. After a long silence, she regained her vigilant posture. Where do you want to talk? It's not far from here. We'll be there in a few minutes. Roland snapped his fingers, and the sound of a car engine came from behind. Get in the car. I've already booked a seat. Roland did not lie to her. The chosen location was a high-end restaurant in a building. Sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window, she could see the silver-covered city skyline. Soft music floated in the hall, and the atmosphere was elegant and quiet. Valkyries knew that choosing this place to talk was also a show of sincerity. If she wanted to kill it, a public place with so many people was not a suitable place to execute her. Looking at the group of witches who were staring at her, she sat down and took a deep breath. Why didn't you ask me to come here directly? That would be a waste of time. I don't think you'll admit it immediately. Before being forced into a desperate situation, people tend to be resistant and run away. It's simpler this way. Roland shrugged. Since we have a preliminary consensus, let's quickly get to the point. It's good for both of us to be honest. I'm Roland Wimbledon, the King of Grey Castle, and one of the creators of the Dream World. What's your identity? One of the creators? Although Valkyries had already guessed that the other party was not a simple visitor, this identity still shocked Valkyries. It was the first time she heard that a domain in the realm of mind could be created by more than one person. But this might also be the reason why he could not completely control the domain like the king. Suppressing the urge to ask who the others were, the Nightmare Lord slowly replied, Valkyries. That's my name. What about your title and level? For example, Sky Lord. You can give me more details. She paused for a moment. Nightmare Lord, that's my title. Ft. Chapter 1320. What's so strange about that? Valkyries said coldly. Do you think anyone can enter the realm of mind? Or are you proud of the fact that you've imprisoned a Grand Lord? Obviously, even in a disadvantageous situation, Valkyries did not give up her pride. Roland even had a hunch that if he humiliated her too much, she would probably rush to the witch and beg for death. But this reply really surprised him. He had only casually asked about the title. After all, most senior demons had their own unique titles, and a person who could host a promotion ceremony in the city of demons was definitely not a nobody. But he did not expect that this demon's origin was more complicated than he thought. Roland originally thought that Valkyries' consciousness had accidentally escaped from the memory fragment, but now there was another possibility. Valkyries might come from the real world. The name Nightmare first appeared in Osruk's documents, and greeting her proved that she was not a historical figure, but was still active among the high-level demons. Moreover, Roland had watched the memory fragment many times, and during this period he did not hear the corresponding title of a Grand Lord. If the demon language he learned from Kaburdabi was right, it meant that the host at that time had not become a Grand Lord yet. Combining this with the Pearl of the Northern Region's analysis of the situation at the front line, Roland was more and more inclined to the latter answer. In other words, Valkyries, who was sitting opposite him, had existed for at least 800 years, and her strength and knowledge were among the rarest of the demons. If Valkyries' abnormal reaction to Lan was taken into account, the time period could be even longer. The value of such a target was far greater than a soul copied from a memory fragment. Even if it didn't say anything, it was equivalent to eliminating a senior Lord-class devil for the front lines. Just this alone was significant. I have to correct you. First of all, I didn't imprison you. At least for now you're free. Roland pretended to be calm and replied. Second, breaking into the dream world is your subjective behavior. I don't think I'm wrong. Valkyries was at a loss for words. After a long while she sighed and said, You call this the dream world? Its pride made it unable to tolerate any humiliation, but at the same time, it was unable to make an unreasonable argument. This silence had already confirmed the origins of the Nightmare Lord. It had indeed come to this place through the realm of mind. Because every time I fall asleep, I will enter this place. In a sense, it is no different from a dream. Ridiculous. Valkyries said in a low voice. Opening up a realm of consciousness required not only talent, but also a highly focused mind and an iron will. Only then would one not get lost in the sea of mana. But this non-magic level male could do it just by sleeping? Isn't this too unfair? Hello, this is what you ordered. Please enjoy. At this time, the waiter served the dishes. All kinds of pastries and drinks were quickly placed on the table. They looked quite delicious. That's the truth. After the waiter left, Roland spread his hands and said, As I said before, being honest is good for both of us. I won't lie to you about this. Besides, the above is not the main point. The main point is the truth about the battle of divine will and the future of each race. He picked up his chopsticks and gestured for her to eat. We can talk about this while eating. Valkyries once again confirmed that this male was different from all the humans she had seen before. This was an important matter that involved the continuation of the race. There was no reason to talk about this while eating. If it were any other normal person, they would probably have become abnormally serious and acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. But he did not seem to be deliberately teasing her. It was as if to him, this was a normal thing to do. She picked up the muddy cup of Peninsula coffee and took a sip. Instantly, a fragrant and smooth taste slid down her throat. It was actually not bad. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt like she had lost. No, she had to take the initiative. Valkyries forced herself to put down the cup and asked in a low voice, Where did you hear that the Battle of Divine Will wasn't the final battle? Roland took out Lan's photo from his wallet and placed it on the table. You've seen her, right? As Lan's portrait had appeared in the video data left behind by the Reflection Church, he deduced that it was even older than the Union's establishment. Therefore, he deliberately made Ling look like Lan to see if the demon in the memory fragment would react. Although the truth was different from what he had expected, Valkyrie's shock at that time showed that she had indeed seen this woman. After a while, the Nightmare Lord nodded. Who is she? A traitorous oracle. Roland slowly recounted the secret conversation in the Rose Café. After listening to this incredible story, even Valkyries was stunned. Could it be that the oracle that my mentor mentioned was also her? Mentor? Transformer Heathtulis. She taught me a lot of knowledge. After hesitating for a moment, Valkyries told him about the Cloud School's past. Her failure to advance also caused the unstable Cloud School to lose its last protective umbrella. So that's what happened. Roland suddenly understood. For the first time in history, the intelligence of the two races was put together. He felt that the missing piece of the puzzle in his mind was finally revealed. Your Majesty, did you think of anything? Phyllis asked. Do you remember the portrait hanging on the wall during the Union's Oath of the Three Kings? Roland took a deep breath. I'm afraid that the person in the portrait was this senior demon called Heathtulis. What did you say? The Union would worship the portrait of a demon. How is that possible? The tequila witches all looked incredulous. According to the influence of the Cloud School during the first battle of divine will, it's not strange for such a situation to happen. Since a demon in the Cloud School could become a senior lord, it's normal for there to be witches or ordinary people from the Cloud School among the higher-ups. I guess before Heathtalise died, she always had doubts about the battle of divine will, right? In the eyes of some people, this opinion was equivalent to siding with the humans. I can't deny that. Valkyries closed her eyes. She had a dispute with the current king, but the tide of the war can't be stopped by one or two people. Chapter 1321. Because you humans have short lifespans and forgetful. Valkyries seemed to have regained a sense of superiority, and subconsciously picked up the cup of coffee. In just a few decades, history will be replaced by lies. Such a thing is almost unimaginable for my race, who have a long lifespan. You seem to have forgotten that no matter how comforting a lie is, it's still a lie. Same here, Roland retorted. Didn't you also deliberately ignore Heathtalie's warning? Apart from those who experienced it, I'm afraid none of the demons of the new generation know about this, right? Valkyries opened his mouth but could not say a word. In the end, he could only silently drink his coffee, which was equivalent to a tacit agreement. Let's make a guess. He pulled the topic back to the betrayal of the Oracle. Perhaps the blurry figure that Transformer saw 1,000 years ago was the same person as Lon in the dream world. Unfortunately, your mentor was unable to form a fixed domain in the realm of mind, so he did not receive a definite hint. You believe the Oracle's words? I believe what I saw. The enemies who claim to be servants of God are eroding this world, and in reality, we have indeed found the ruins left behind by past civilizations. I don't know where those victorious civilizations went, but the truth is that they have never returned. Don't you think it's strange? Perhaps there is a more beautiful world that is more suitable for an upgraded race to live in. Such as the origin of magic? Roland said sarcastically. Upgrading is a path to godhood, but after becoming a god, you can't freely return to your hometown. What kind of god is that? And when you get close to the origin of magic, which is the erosion rift, will it really make you feel good and comfortable? If that's the case, you should have jumped in long ago. This guy really sent a witch to follow me all the way. Valkyries thought angrily, but he could not refute. When he stood in front of the Scarlet Rift, he only felt a strong sense of danger. Even so, what can you change? After a long silence, the Nightmare Lord said in a low voice, "It's too late. If you were a member of the Cloud School, you might have a chance to turn the situation around 1,000 years ago. But when our race received the inheritance of the third civilization, the war was unstoppable." The third civilization was probably the underground civilization. Roland couldn't help but slow down his speech. The so-called inheritance, what exactly is it? Valkyrie stared blankly for a moment before chuckling. What? So you guys have never obtained any legacy shards? Answer His Majesty's question. Phyllis bellowed. We don't need any fragments. Your Majesty's knowledge is enough. Only a group of barbaric monsters like you would start a war over a stone. Just when Roland thought that the King of Nightmares would not answer his question, the King of Nightmares said, "I will tell you. Then you will understand why it is impossible to turn the situation around. As long as a civilization has tasted the sweetness of inheritance, it will never forget the sweetness and will only desire more." It paused and looked at the witches beside Roland. You are the best examples. If you were to ask humans to give up all the changes brought about by the King of Greycastle, would you be willing? What you mean is, that's right. The legacy shard is just one of the ways of inheritance. The King of Nightmares' words confirmed Roland's conjecture. You impart the new knowledge here to humans, which is equivalent to humans obtaining the inheritance of the dream world. But the effect of the fragment is more thorough and comprehensive. It doesn't target an individual, but the entire civilization. Following that, Valkyrie spoke of the Road of Integration that happened more than 100 years after the end of the first battle of divine will. It was an ultimate battle that the Union did not know about. You should also know that the third civilization once covered more than half of the continent. If our race occupied the Blackstone region, humans occupied the Land of Dawn, and the second civilization occupied the Sky Sea realm, then the third civilization was the master of the underground world. They were like earthworms. Their bodies were extremely weak, but they had a unique way of using magic power. Unfortunately, these fellows were unlucky and encountered something they shouldn't have. When they were digging holes in the mountains, they encountered a crack in the ground and directly penetrated from the Blackstone region to the Sky Sea realm. It doesn't matter if you don't understand. You just need to understand that they inadvertently opened the barrier between their nest and the Sky Sea realm. The latter took advantage of the situation and invaded the Blackstone region, killing the earthworms and forcing them to retreat. If we could lend them a helping hand, they might have a chance of survival. But to our race, it was also the best time to verify the rumors of the relic. Therefore, the king, who was still an ascendant, led a team to attack the fleeing second civilization from behind and trap them in the Ghost Valley. This place is located between two mountain peaks. Its surface area is about half the size of the fertile plains. There are underground rivers and strata on both sides that stretch for thousands of miles. The bottom of the valley varies greatly. One moment it was an underground cave, the next moment it could become an open hill. Even if the earthworms were good at digging holes, it would be difficult for them to completely conceal their tracks. This war lasted for nearly 10 years. The number of our race's primal demons that died here was more than the number of humans that died in the first battle of divine will. In the end, the king and the Sky Sea realm each obtained a portion of the inheritance fragment. Roland could not help but hold his breath. Even though he did not want to reveal his eagerness to let the other party be pleased, this piece of news made him momentarily forget to control his expression. And then? That's it. Huh? I'm talking about coffee. Valkyries licked her lips. You were the one who said that we should talk while eating, right? Roland was instantly speechless. Even at this stage, it was still trying to regain the initiative in the conversation. Should he say that the other party was too competitive or too arrogant? Nevertheless, he immediately called the waiter over and ordered 3 cups of Peninsula coffee. You may continue. The fusion wasn't that complicated. The king placed the stolen fragment and our race's inheritance fragment together. The two then merged into one. At that moment, we took over a portion of what the other party once had. Language, knowledge, magic power, technology, and even life. The King of Nightmares said slowly. The earthworms, that were still alive withered and died like weeds. And the power of our race also increased by leaps and bounds. Magic power seemed to have lifted the veil, and all kinds of knowledge appeared in our minds. Whether we were willing to accept it or not, we couldn't deny one point. Our race was far stronger than it was during the first battle of divine will. From that moment on, no one doubted the gift of God. Just as I said, once you experience this feeling once, you will never forget it. She picked up a new cup of coffee and said, Now do you understand what I mean by it's too late? No matter what you obtain from the dream world, as long as you obtain the human's inheritance fragment, it will all belong to the victor. Do you want to use the warning of betraying the oracle to stop this war? That will only be a waste of effort. Even Mentor Heathtules could not do it, let alone a human male. Indeed. Roland sighed. But I never intended to use a warning to stop the war. What are you trying to say? Valkyries frowned. Chapter 13:22. Are you sure you can win? The Nightmare Lord did not avoid his gaze. The two stared at each other for a long time before Roland replied. Of course I can win this war. If you have another 100 years, even if you hide in the Blackstone region, you will still be wiped out by the humans. But I can't wait that long. The Oracle's warning indicates that danger is imminent. I need to reach the bottomless land as soon as possible, and I need your help. That? Help me speed up the defeat of the demons, or rather, your Western Front army. Roland crossed his legs. For example, the processing method of God's Stone of Retaliation, the abilities of the King and the Grand Lord, the weakness of the spider demons, etc. This is also the reason why I sought you out. As long as you can think of. Bang. Valkyrie slammed her palm on the table, causing coffee to spill from the cup. Don't be too arrogant, male. She suppressed her voice. You can kill me, but don't expect me to kneel and beg for mercy. As for me betraying my race, don't even think about it. Help you defeat the Western Front Army? Dream on. Impudent. Don't be rude to His Majesty. The witches shouted at the same time. Both sides were in a state of mutual hostility, and the atmosphere seemed to have dropped to a freezing point. What's going on with that table? The whispers of others came from the side. A couple quarrel? The number is obviously wrong. But speaking of which, the girls around him are really beautiful. That Peninsula guy is even better. Damn it, where did he come from? I'm so envious. Roland rolled his eyes in his heart. The murderous intent on both sides was clearly overflowing, so where was the shadow of romance? All right, control yourselves. He pretended to be nonchalant and waved his hand, signaling for Phyllis and the rest to stop. He then leaned back on the bench and looked down at the Nightmare Lord. Don't you think that refusing to accept reality is a betrayal of the race? Reality? That's right. Roland's voice suddenly deepened. If the Oracle's warning is true, then there are only two paths before all civilizations. One is to fight the battle of divine will to the end, and the other is to completely end this endless war through the realm of mind. Don't tell me you don't know what the consequences of your choice will be? Without giving the other party a chance to refute, he raised his voice a little. After staying in the dream world for so long, you should know how much I can raise the overall strength of the human race. Without the new legacy shard, with your current strength, you won't be able to contend against me. If the war goes on for decades, how many people will your tribe have to sacrifice? How much price will you have to pay? Is this the result you wish to see? Then they also died honorably on the battlefield. No, he died in a meaningless lie. Roland corrected him. Furthermore, due to the existence of the legacy shard, this war will never be resolved. Hatred and suspicion will cause the flames of war to spread to the Blackstone region, until your clan no longer exists. The only one who can stop it is me. Once I am gone, the destruction of the demons is only a matter of time. Compared to losing a vanguard army, isn't it obvious which method is more beneficial to the race? Valkyrie's face was ashen. He did not say a word. In fact, we might not have much time left. If we miss the opportunity to end the war, then there will be no other way out. He put down his leg and leaned forward slightly. Now, do you still insist on your opinion? After a moment of silence, the Nightmare King said coldly, Male, why should I believe you? Based on what the Oracle said, once you become a god, who can guarantee that you will let my clan live? Based on your words? You don't have a better choice. On one side, there is a possibility of survival. On the other side, it is destined to perish. That's all. Roland softened his tone. The purpose of the war has changed. What was impossible in the past doesn't mean it's impossible now. As long as we think from a different perspective, both races can live. Valkyrie's lips were tightly shut. He did not speak. Roland did not wait any longer. I know this is a difficult choice, so I don't expect an immediate answer. Go back first. He raised his head in disbelief. That's it. What else? Tie you up and torture you? Or kill you directly? I said, at least for now you're free. Roland took out his cell phone. By the way, give me your number. That way, I can tell you about the war in the north immediately. This might help you make a decision. Don't forget, the future of the demons is in your hands. Although he looked reluctant, Valkyrie still gave him his number. Just as he was about to leave, Roland called out to him. I want to ask you another question. Do you think the transformer Heathdelis from 1,000 years ago did something wrong? Valkyrie's figure paused for a moment, and he left the dining hall without looking back. Your Majesty, are you really going to let a senior demon move freely in the dream world? Phyllis asked worriedly. Not so. Roland shook his head. Haven't you noticed? She's no longer the senior demon she used to be. The demon didn't die immediately after losing the magic stone, and even had a corresponding identity. This could only mean one thing. She's now one with the dream world. Roland firmly believed in humanity's victory, but winning in 100 years was not the same as winning in 10 years. He needed to inflict pain on the demons in the shortest time possible, making them completely lose the will to resist, and thus clear a path to the bottomless land. The Nightmare Lord was just one of the cards. No matter what choice she made, she would not be able to change this decision. But at the same time, no one would complain about having more cards in their hands at such a critical moment. If he could win over a former senior demon, the pressure on the First Army would undoubtedly lessen significantly. After all, time was what he lacked the most at the moment. The winner is contestant Fei Yuhan. Wow! The audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. She waved at the tens of thousands of spectators, then walked down the arena under the incessant flashing lights, and entered the contestants' lounge. This was a match, with a predetermined outcome. Even if her opponent did not deliberately go easy on her according to the Guardian's instructions, she still managed to defeat him within the first minute of the match. In the past, such an outcome would not have made her feel any joy, but it was different this time. This was because she saw Valkyries, who had left for a long time, return to the arena. And a few hours ago, she had left the arena at the same time as Roland. After changing her clothes, Fei Yuhan boarded the association's bus and quietly waited for Valkyries' arrival. The anticipation in her heart did not subside. She had never experienced such a feeling. When Valkyries appeared in her vision, she could even hear the thumping of her chest. Just as Fei Yuhan expected, Valkyrie sat beside her. "I won today's match." "Ah, congratulations," Valkyrie said absent-mindedly. This was a rare expression for her. "Thank you. It's a pity you didn't sign up for the competition. Otherwise, I would have been able to admire the strength of an outstanding martialist from the Kargard Peninsula." "There will be a chance," she replied. "Of course, there will be a chance." Fei Yuhan smiled. Even without observing his expression, Fei Yuhan could tell that Valkyries was being perfunctory. But since she knew that Valkyries came from another world, and that world seemed to be rather ancient, she could use more direct methods to obtain information. After all the people returning to the sanatorium had arrived, the bus started moving. When the bus reached the suburbs, Fei Yuhan secretly stretched out her finger and reached for Valkyrie's shoulder bag. This was the bag she had bought for Valkyries as a discharge gift. Before this, she had looked through the bag countless times and knew its shape like the back of her hand. There was an unfinished area between the main road and the newly built road in the city, but it did not affect the traffic. At most, there would be some tremors and dust. At the moment when the tires rolled over the uneven road, a condensed force of nature appeared at her fingertips and gently slid down. It was as if it was a natural fall. An inconspicuous decorative piece fell into her hand, and hidden within it was a miniature voice recorder. Chapter 1323. Fei Yuhan returned to her room in the Greenland Sanatorium, locked the door, and took out a recording device embedded in a decorative piece. It was about the size of a grain of rice, and did not have a playback function. She needed to insert it into a special reader to listen to the recorded content. After transferring the data into the notebook, she found the recording that was closest to the moment when Valkyries left the dojo and pressed play. "Bzz. We meet again, Miss Valkyries." Roland's voice sounded. "He's here." Fei Yuhan curled her lips and brewed herself a cup of hot tea. She decided to enjoy the fruits of her long planning. The steaming hot tea gradually cooled down, and the owner of the tea did not even have the time to take a sip. Even though she had a premonition, she realized that what she had heard was far beyond her imagination. When she pressed the stop button, Fei Yuhan realized that her fingertips were trembling slightly. For a martial artist who had been famous for a long time, this could be considered as losing control. She finally understood why the hunter, Roland, would crush the wine glass in his hand during the banquet. If the secret of God was involved, it would be abnormal if he did not turn pale with fright. A dream world that was created, a civilization that fought for survival, a connection between two worlds, and a guardian that traversed the realm of mind. Was there anything more incredible than this? Fei Yuhan was slightly disappointed that the two chose to talk face-to-face in a coffee shop, But after listening to them, she realized that even if she said the content openly, others would only think that it was nonsense. Even so, Fei Yuhan did not think that what the two said was false. If she had been secretly observing Roland since the day he had been faking it, it would be too much of an exaggeration. If this world was really created by humans, then she would probably be the first person to pry into the truth behind the scenes. Heh. Fei Yuhan laughed softly. This feeling is really too satisfying. As for the oracle's question about whether it was fiction or reality, she did not care at all. No one knew better than herself that she was a living existence. Whether it was her movements or the thoughts that popped up in her mind, they all came from her own will. It was the same when she took the initiative to explore the outsider's secrets. Perhaps Roland was one of the creators of the world, but so what? If a planet was created by cosmic energy and elementary particles, then there was no essential difference if the former was replaced with a person. Fei Yuhan leaned against the chair and allowed her body to tremble as she enjoyed this long-awaited happiness. After a long time, his excited emotions gradually calmed down. Logically speaking, the Martialist Association should have reported such critical information as the gods' futile attempt to destroy this world, and the nature of the fallen evils. However, since it involved so many people and could almost rewrite history, she decided to observe for a while longer. After all, apart from the conversation between the two of them, she did not have any concrete evidence on hand. Moreover, the possibility that both of them were severe hysteria addicts could not be ruled out. She had also heard of the urban legend that there was a chance of developing telepathy and resonating with people of the same kind since the second grade of middle school. Although the probability of such a situation was extremely low, she had to be on guard. Fortunately, Vaucries had officially established a relationship with Roland, so there would only be more opportunities for her to pry into his secrets. Now, what interested Fei Yuhan the most was the other world that the two of them originally resided in. For example, those women who called Roland, Your Majesty. If they could come to the dream world, could I also see what the other world looks like? To see the so-called reality. Where did you run off to? Garcia glared at Roland in dissatisfaction. Didn't you say you were going to watch the match with Zero? Sorry. The association had something to tell them, so I couldn't do anything about it. Roland rubbed the back of his head. He was in the wrong, so he was very decisive in admitting defeat. In order to avoid the time when he and Vaucries would return, he purposely stayed at the restaurant for a while longer. He did not expect to run into the evening rush hour, which resulted in the two of them waiting at the entrance of the dojo for another half an hour. If not for my patrolling mission, I would have left you behind long ago, Garcia said unhappily. Bring the little girl to a good meal to make up for it. She patted Zero's head. The latter nodded and ran to Roland's side with small quick steps. She even bowed to Garcia and said, Thank you, sister. If he mistreats you, you must tell me. Okay. This girl, she actually pretended to be so obedient in front of outsiders. Roland could not help but curse inwardly, but on the surface he looked extremely sincere. Don't worry, leave it to me. Oh right. Do you want me to bring you some too? No need. Garcia waved generously. You guys go ahead. I'll return to the dojo first. Sorry to trouble you today. Roland said goodbye to Garcia and shrugged at Zero. Let's go, there's a commercial plaza in front. You can choose whatever you want to eat tonight. Okay. Zero replied in a muffled voice. Strange, shouldn't she take the opportunity to demand an exorbitant price? Roland was slightly surprised. Why did she suddenly become so quiet? Why wasn't today's match exciting? No, it was much better than on TV. That's good. When you come back from the holidays, I'll take you to watch a few more live matches. Anyway, I'm a member of the association, so it shouldn't be difficult to get tickets. They crossed the road along the sidewalk and walked side by side on the crowded street. The snow under their feet had been stepped on, leaving only the sound of pa-chi pa-chi. However, more snowflakes floated down from the night sky and were dyed with gorgeous colors by the flashing neon lights. At this rate, the city would become pure white again tomorrow morning. Gradually, Zero fell behind. Roland suddenly felt that the corner of his clothes was being tugged by something. He stopped and turned around in surprise. The little girl lowered her head and pulled his clothes without saying a word. What's wrong? Roland was stunned. It's my fault that I didn't accompany you, but work. Zero shook her head. I don't want to go back. What? I don't want to go back to my hometown, uncle. She raised her head and bit her lip. Can I continue to live at your place during the 2 months of the holidays? I'll find a way to pay the rent. I used to pay for groceries before, so it'll definitely be faster now. I promise I won't be late. Looking at the little girl who seemed to have plucked up her courage, Roland was momentarily speechless. The lines of handwriting in her diary that he had peeked at in the beginning seemed to resurface in his mind, and he suddenly felt that he had done something wrong. It was no secret that Zero's family was not harmonious. Judging from her usual words and deeds, as well as the way she ate and dressed, her family was probably quite harsh on her. However, Roland had never intervened, or it could be said that he had deliberately maintained the status quo, because she was the other creator of this world. Therefore, if he wanted the dream world to run as usual, maintaining the inertia was undoubtedly the safest way. This was also the reason why he did not immediately let Zero join the association after she had awakened. Would changing the status quo increase the possibility of awakening the other side of her? If she became a pure witch again, what would happen to this world? He had always been on guard against this happening. However, Roland had neglected the original form of Zero, a 13 or 14-year-old girl. Do you really think that this world is fictional? When Lon asked him, he gave a negative answer. However, he did not do this when it came to Zero. No, can't I? The little girl's voice became softer and softer as the courage she had mustered gradually faded. You know, I'm not your legal guardian. If I keep you in the tube-shaped apartment, it'll be fine for a day or two, but if it's too long, your family will definitely come looking for you. By then, no matter how unwilling you are, it'll be impossible for you to continue living here, and I'll get into a lot of trouble. Zero's eyes dimmed. But there's a way to change this fact. Roland squatted down and patted the snow off her shoulder. Really? She suddenly raised her head. Just join the Martialist Association. At any time, the association is a legal shelter for the awakened. As long as you decide to stay, no one can change your mind, even if you're underage. Roland laughed. This is the privilege of a martialist. How about it? Do you want to become a martialist? But even if you join the association, you still have to continue your studies. Don't think that you don't have to go to school anymore. He raised his eyebrows. As for the competition, it doesn't matter. If you don't like fighting, it's fine not to participate. His words seemed to put the last burden on Zero's shoulders. She took a deep breath and nodded vigorously. Then I'll join. Okay, I'll help you fill out the application form when we get back. After that, you can live wherever you want. Can I live in 0825? Roland held out his hand to her. Of course. The inertia had been broken. The future changes might be unknown, but it was all a choice of free will. Chapter 1324. At noon the next day after he woke up from the dream, Roland received a piece of good news. The Ministry of Engineering and the Ministry of Construction had finally completed the site and equipment arrangement for the Glory of the Sun project. Since 52 kilograms of spherical uranium, 235 could reach the critical state in theory, element purification was not the biggest hurdle. Lucia had been busy for so long, and had accumulated hundreds of kilograms of pure uranium in the Institute of High Energy Physics. However, the power of the fission reaction could not be fully exerted by piling up uranium-235, unless the amount of uranium-235 was shockingly large. However, its safety and practicality would be greatly reduced, so it needed a specific configuration to stimulate its energy efficiency. Another key point of the project was the test explosion. It was one thing to calculate in theory, but another to put it into practice. From the theoretical device to the actual product, it was almost impossible to succeed in one try. According to statistics, many of the weapons developed by Roland for the First Army had failed more than double digits during the test. even with the help of reliable blueprints and witches. The Glory of the Sun project was undoubtedly more special. Other weapons could be manufactured, improved, and tested in one place, but not the fission reaction. Whether the result was a success or a failure, there would be a forbidden area. In fact, it took nearly a month to inspect the test site. Although the fertile plains was vast, it was obviously not suitable for the test explosion as the main development direction of Neverwinter in the future. There were many isolated islands in the fjords, but they were too far away from each other. Now that the sea transportation was under great pressure, it was difficult to find ships to transport all kinds of equipment. The uninhabited desert in the south seemed to be the most suitable place. However, considering that a large number of matchmen had been buried there for future development, Roland hesitated for a long time and rejected the southernmost region. The test explosion site was finally set to the west of the Great Snow Mountain, the former demon outpost camp. Although it was possible to encounter demonic beasts and demons there, the risk was still acceptable. At the same time, whether the test explosion was successful or not, it would form a polluted area, which would improve the security of Neverwinter's rear. Only after crossing these two thresholds could they be considered qualified for the nuclear test. Your Majesty, please take me with you. Me too. I won't say any more. As long as it's a weapon that can kill demons, I'll try it no matter what. While receiving the message, Roland also received a conversation request from the third border city. Looking at the three big faces on the other side of the light screen, he could not help but wipe his sweat. This is just a theoretical device test. It's still far from a real weapon test. Ever since he instilled the concept of the Glory of the Sun into the Tequila Witches, Pasha and Celine had been obsessed with it. However, he did not expect that even Alethea would join in, and there seemed to be a hint of devotion in her tone. If it is really as you say, and it can illuminate the dark clouds above mankind, then I hope to be able to witness its birth along the way. Pasha lowered her mane whiskers. I've also contributed a lot to the manufacturing of the core components of the Glory of the Sun. You can't possibly let the participants of the plan stay here, right? Celine added. But there is no tunnel from the Great Snow Mountain to the experimental observation point. Don't worry about that. There's no sun during the months of demons, so we'll spend more time outside than usual. Alethea replied hurriedly, as if she was afraid that he would say no. Besides, the passage that Fran went through last time is still there. We won't attract anyone's attention when we leave the city. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at Anna, who nodded at him with a smile. Since the three of them had come to this point, it would be unreasonable to disagree. Then I'll ask the Ministry of Construction to reserve a place for you in the bunker. Remember to bring some God's punishment witches with you, and be careful on the road. Thank you, Your Majesty, the three of them said happily. Looking at this scene, Roland felt a little emotional. In his previous life, this kind of weapon was often regarded as an opportunity for self-destruction. Countless literary works and biographies described it as the sword of Damocles hanging over mankind's head. But here it was the dawn of hope. When darkness came, only strength could protect civilization and cut through thorns. He looked at Anna and said, "Let's go." 50 kilometers north of Shangxi in the heavy snow. The snow here was much heavier than in Neverwinter. Not only did it cover the land that had been corroded by demons, but it also made the construction of the bunker extremely difficult. Fortunately, with the help of the powerful God's punishment witches, the construction team finally settled down in this uninhabited place. To ensure the quality of the project, the workers in the team were all elites from the Northern Expedition Regiment. After experiencing the bloody battles on the fertile plains, the harsh weather was not the toughest enemy. Moreover, they had been informed before they set off that this construction project was the top secret of Neverwinter. It was related to the future of their homeland and the kingdom. Coupled with the high remuneration offered by the administrative office, everyone was motivated to work. If it were in Grey Castle in the past, no matter how much the nobles pressured them, they would never allow their subordinates to open up a camp in such a place. It took Roland and his team nearly 2 days to reach the explosion test site. After entering the command post that was half buried in the ground, They saw a completely different scene in the room. The thick brick walls blocked the wind and snow. The blazing fireplace crackled, and the project leaders were holding oil lamps and checking their tasks against the forms. They looked extremely busy. Seeing his arrival, everyone stopped what they were doing and then saluted. "Your Majesty." "Go on with your work." Roland waved his hand and then looked at Car Van Bate. "How's the situation here?" "We haven't found any traces of demons in the past month," Car replied. "They should have completely abandoned this place. As for demonic beasts, we occasionally see dozens of them. But they're not a threat to the garrison troops. The explosion test site and simulation equipment have been built. If you don't have any other instructions, they can completely meet the requirements of the plan." "Where's the explosion test site?" "North 15 kilometers away from here." Carr pointed at the map and said, "You can't see it from the command post. The snow here is too thick. Even if it's as high as a 3-story building, it'll be blocked by the snow." "It doesn't matter. We'll naturally see it when it explodes." Roland smiled and turned to Anna. "Then let's start the first explosion test." In order to verify the feasibility of the explosion, the two had prepared at least 3 configurations for the test in the past 6 months. This time, it was the simplest configuration of a gun. Chapter 1325. 15 kilometers away. The high platform made of steel stood tall in the white snowfield. It did not look like a creation of this era. The neat and dense structure, the beams and steel cables with icicles hanging from them, and the layers of barbed wire surrounded it, all revealed the beauty of the industry. Hundreds of people surrounded it, preparing for the detonation. As the entire device weighed nearly 10 tons, and Hummingbird had gone to the front, it could not be assembled in Neverwinter. They could only transport the parts to the test explosion site and assemble it on the spot. Fortunately, its structure was very simple, and the need for disassembly and transportation was taken into account during the design, so it was not demanding on the workers. This was also the difference between the glory of the sun and other weapons. Even if the site and equipment had been set up, it still took 1 or 2 days to complete the final preparations. At this moment, Roland and Anna were standing on the top of the tower, directing the assembly of the device. Next is the third core component. Pay attention to the direction of the interface, be careful. Everyone listen to my command. 3, 2, 1. As the leader of the workers shouted, a silver-white cylinder was slowly pushed into the device. Until this step was completed, Roland slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Inside the cylinder was the main source of energy for the test explosion. 2 separated uranium-235 cylinders, each weighing 20 kilograms. When the 2 were combined, it would provide a total charge mass of 40 kilograms. This value was lower than the critical limit of 53 kilograms. In theory, there would not be a violent fission reaction, but as he had said before, the critical value was not a fixed value. Conditions such as shape, temperature, and pressure could change the value, which was why nuclear weapons that relied purely on materials had little practical value. For example, 52 kilograms of uranium-235 in the spherical state seemed stable, but in fact, it was already a volcano that was ready to erupt. Even a slight impact or vibration could cause it to cross the critical point. Similarly, although it was safe to use several small uranium blocks, it would also make the detonation more difficult. When several uranium blocks were combined into one, the whole could indeed exceed the critical point, but the high temperature produced by the fission reaction would cause the uranium block to expand rapidly, reducing its density, and the violent explosion would push the raw materials far away, thus interrupting the reaction. In short, a reasonable configuration not only had to make the uranium reach a critical state, but it also had to be maintained as long as possible in order to unleash the power of the fission reaction. The reason why the gun configuration was called a gun configuration was because its principle was very similar to the ancient guns. Through the detonation of explosives, one piece of uranium would suddenly push another piece of uranium. Under great pressure, the density of the uranium would increase rapidly. Even if the mass was slightly lower, it could still cross the critical point. When the outer shell of the device was connected, Anna personally inserted a can with a warning sign of the radioactive source into the reserve tailport. It was also the last critical component of the test explosion. For a moment, Roland felt as if his face had been pricked by something, and even his breathing stopped for half a beat. See beryllium neutron source. Just like its name suggested, it could provide a large number of free neutrons for fission, and it was the most direct way to reduce the critical value. Inside the can-like metal container, there was a row of hollow spheres. Each sphere was the size of a ping-pong ball, and the core was a marble-like spheroid. It was tightly wrapped in gold foil, and around it was a honeycomb of beryllium sheets. When the uranium pieces collided, they would also smash the small can at the bottom of the gun barrel. All the hollow spheres would be compressed by the violent explosive gas until they were thinner than paper. After the gold foil broke, the beryllium sheets would be intimately attached to the spheroid, completely accepting the alpha particles released by the spheroid, and then blasting out several times the number of neutrons. These neutrons would participate in the fission reaction of uranium-235. If luck was on their side, they could consume a few more % of the raw material before the reaction was terminated, greatly increasing the power of the nuclear weapon. Since the half-life of polonium-210 was only 138 days, it was essential to provide a replacement port. In addition, leaving the neutron source in the weapon for a long time was also extremely dangerous. After all, as long as the beryllium was in contact with it, it would spontaneously release neutrons. Once the gold foil was damaged, the consequences would be unimaginable. After the beryllium neutron source was installed in the principal device, it turned from a gentle and harmless thing into a monster that could engulf everyone on the scene at any time. Although Roland knew that what he felt was just an illusion, and it was impossible for a human to capture the changes in the number of neutrons in the environment, he still subconsciously breathed a lot lighter. At this step, the principal device officially completed all the preparation work before detonation. Anna took the initiative to hold his hand. "Give the order." Roland nodded slightly under the other party's calm and steady gaze. Regardless of the result, the glory of the Sun Project had finally reached this step. After taking this step, mankind would enter a new realm. He looked at Sean. "Pass my order. Inform the command post to start the ignition in 6 hours." "Yes, Your Majesty." 6:00. Woo, 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 woo. Device number 1 has entered the ignition stage. I repeat, device number 1 has entered the ignition stage. All personnel, please pack up immediately and leave the site in an orderly manner according to the drill plan. Please note, this is not a drill. The test explosion site will be closed in an hour. Everyone must evacuate to a safe area before then. Soon, the evacuation announcement was heard along with the alarm. "Hurry up, everyone gather in the open space in front of the tower. Don't leave anyone behind. Construction Team 2 count off. 1, 2, 3. Seal the test explosion site door. All members of the God's Punishment Witch Squad are here. Begin evacuation." The quiet snowfield seemed to be boiling. People's shouts and the repeated alarm echoed each other, and the atmosphere became tense and dignified. Everyone knew that they were about to witness an unprecedented experiment. 3:00 in the command post, Roland and Anna took out 2 keys and opened the cover of the control panel. When the switches were pressed one by one, the green lights on the table lit up one after another. The main cable is transmitting power. Mystery Moon number 1 is working normally. The load is rising steadily. Now switch to line 1. Understood. Line 1 has been connected. The power supply to the device is working normally. The observer reported the operation of the detonation system loudly. When the last green light lit up, it meant that the electric current had been conducted to the high platform 15 kilometers away. 1:00. The alarm above the command post also sounded. It meant that there was only 1 hour left for the detonation procedure. The doors and windows of the bunker were all closed, and the oil lamps were extinguished one by one to avoid accidents caused by the vibration. The higher-ups of Neverwinter entered a special observation room. According to Roland's instructions, the outer surface of the room was built in the shape of a trapezoid to better withstand the shock waves, and the inner side was deepened to accommodate the huge body of the original carrier. Pasha and the other tequila witches had been waiting for a long time. 0:15 The sky gradually darkened. The last round of urgent sirens finally arrived. Whether it was the higher-ups, soldiers or workers, they all put on black sunglasses to block out the strong light according to the rehearsal. Although most people did not understand why they had to wear glasses to block their vision on such a dark snowy day. Didn't that mean he couldn't see anything? 0:05 Countdown. 5 minutes. When the announcement sounded again, the scene had become silent. All communication and discussion had stopped. Everyone stared fixedly at the pitch-black darkness in front of them, involuntarily holding their breaths. Countdown of 3 minutes. Roland felt sweat forming on his palms. Anna looked at him with a smile, and gently held his hand. 1 minute. A hand reached over from the other side and 5 fingers overlapped. Countdown of 10 seconds. 9. Although it was a pity that he could not press the detonation button himself, Roland knew that this was only the beginning of his long historical journey. 3, 2, 1. Detonate. The snowfield in the distance was quiet, as if nothing had happened. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. It felt like a long time had passed, but it also felt like only a short moment. Chapter 13:26. Pasha, on the other hand, had a clearer view. The original carriers didn't rely on their eyes. For her, Aletheia, and Celine, any of their tentacles could be used as their eyes, so they couldn't wear anything to block the light. Even though Roland had reminded them that it was best to avoid looking directly at the center of the explosion for 5 to 10 seconds after the detonation, they didn't look away until the very last second. It wasn't just her. The other two did the same. No one wanted to miss this long-awaited scene. Could humans defeat demons? During the hundreds of years that the tequila survivors had been hiding underground, no one dared to ask this question. At that time, they had gritted their teeth and persevered for the sake of their responsibility, and their sisters who had sacrificed themselves. As for the final outcome, anyone who thought about it would feel resistant, afraid that their unremitting efforts and fighting spirit would be destroyed. The pitch-black ceiling that they saw every day when they raised their heads was the deepest impression in their memories. And this darkness was broken by a brilliant blue light. It wasn't pure blue. Unlike pigments, paint, gems, or lake water, Pasha found it hard to describe. It was more like an illusion that it was blue because it was too white. The light expanded rapidly along the horizon and illuminated the land in an instant. She couldn't help but be dumbfounded. This was the first time she had seen something other than the sun and the moon that could illuminate the entire land. It wasn't an illusion. She clearly saw the originally dark snowfield return to its daytime appearance. Trees cast heavy shadows on the snow, and the closer one got to the center of the white light, the clearer the outline of the land became. Almost at the same time, Pasha felt a sharp pain in front of her, as if her skin was burning. This was the experience of being exposed to the midday sun. But she didn't feel the slightest fear in her heart. She even opened all the tentacles on her body to receive the light that broke through the darkness. If it could bring new hope to humans, what was this little bit of pain? It would only bring more pleasure in return. The light only lasted for less than a second before it turned from blue to white, and then from white to red. Then, the ground shook violently, and the airflow that rushed toward them brought up pieces of flying snow, which hit the outer wall of the bunker, making a crackling sound. Finally, there was a deafening roar that lasted for a long time, as if the entire earth was roaring. After the explosion, the world became quiet again. A strange cloud appeared on the horizon in the distance. It was large at the top and small at the bottom, like a mushroom extending upwards. At the top of the mushroom, dark red flames could still be seen rolling. Lighting up the sky with his own strength was definitely an effect that no firearm could compare to. He could feel such power from 15 kilometers away. What would it be like if he was close by? Pasha could already imagine the scene when the new weapon exploded among the demons. She had thought that the bombardment of over 100 cannons was already the most shocking scene, but compared to this scene, it was not even worth mentioning. If the artillery drill 2 years ago could be said to have changed the worldview of every tequila witch, then this experiment could be said to have reshaped the concepts that they had painstakingly formed in their minds. Whoosh! Enthusiastic cheers erupted in the command post and observation room. The main tentacles of the 3 senior witches were also entangled together. For the first time, Aletheia didn't call them mortals or ordinary people to distinguish them. Celine's voice was full of excitement. Pasha interrupted. Celine replied without hesitation. Aletheia also expressed her agreement. A year ago, the standard of victory was to resist the attack of the demons, persist until the end of the battle of divine will, and then look for opportunities after 400 years of development. Unknowingly, this standard had been raised a lot. Pasha finally laughed. Humans could defeat demons. And it might be faster than they had expected. That was because that expanse of darkness no longer existed. Among all the jubilant crowd, only Roland and Anna maintained their usual calmness. What's the result? Anna asked as she took off her sunglasses. At least we've taken the first step. Roland spread his hands. The theoretical device had undoubtedly triggered a fission reaction. That extremely dazzling flash was proof. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to cause such a huge wave, just by relying on the thousands of kilograms of explosives in the device. But judging from the subsequent shock wave and smoke column, it was obvious that the effect was quite different from what he had expected. They should have been more violent. As for the specific result, we can only make a judgment after the command post has collected all the on-site data. Half an hour later, the experimental team successively brought back the detection devices set up around the site, floating papers. Since it was impossible to accurately measure the yield of the explosives with the current technical means in Neverwinter, Roland naturally thought of using paper to measure the power method. When the airwave blew here, the paper would be thrown into the air, and affected by the explosion wind, the paper would fall farther than before. Based on this difference, the approximate yield of the explosion could be estimated. Roland did not need to calculate it himself. He had already copied a complete parameter table from the dream world, and he only needed to compare the statistical results. Although there was a certain error in this method, it was enough to guide the experiment. After comparison, the result was not much different from what he had expected. The power of the theoretical device explosion this time was only about 3,000 tons of TNT, and the amount of uranium-235 used was as much as 40 kilograms. If the first atomic bomb Little Boy used only 6% of the raw materials to participate in the fission reaction, and the explosive yield was 13,000 tons of TNT, then the nuclear material utilization rate in this experiment was less than 2%, and it could be said to be a dirty bomb. Of course, it was not to say that Roland was very disappointed. After all, in the history of weapons, there was no such thing as a so-called dirty bomb standard. Compared with the small nuclear weapons that were often used as high as tens of times, these veterans that had been put into actual combat were all classified as dirty bombs. A 152mm grenade with a charge of only a few kilograms could cause astonishing damage, let alone 3,000 tons of TNT. In terms of the experiment, the first theoretical device could not be considered very successful, but it was still a deadly weapon. It looks like the road ahead will be very long. Anna put down the form and let out a long breath. Her eyes were not the slightest bit discouraged, but full of fighting spirit. That's right. Roland nodded. Chapter 1327. A week later, a strange-looking vehicle slowly drove into the test explosion site. It was the first crawler tractor manufactured by the Ministry of Industry of Neverwinter based on the complete set of blueprints and technical instructions provided by the Grey Pot Design Bureau. However, other than the chassis being the same, its appearance was completely different from that of the experimental product. The vehicle was surrounded by thick armor plates and looked like a moving square box at first glance. After driving into the explosion zone, it stopped in front of the melted iron tower for about half an hour before turning around and driving south along the original road. After driving for about 5 kilometers, a wheeled truck approached and picked up all the people on board. while the square box tractor was directly abandoned in the snow. This group of people traveled all the way and returned to Neverwinter from the Great Snow Mountain the next day. Upon receiving the news, Roland summoned them to the castle immediately. How was it? Did you encounter any accidents? Please rest assured, Your Majesty. Everything went smoothly. Phyllis smiled and presented a sigil to him. Summer quickly located the scene at that time. We stayed longer than expected. Because there was a specific time, it wasn't too difficult, Summer said shyly. Compared to the other sisters, my ability to control my ability is considered poor. Alright, don't be modest. It's true. Roland took the sigil, but his expression was still solemn. He tilted his head to look at Momo beside him. Sorry to trouble you. No, you're too kind, Your Majesty. Momo reached out to cover one of her eyes to avoid seeing His Majesty. At the same time, she displayed her ability. After a while, she put down her hand and bowed to Roland. Everyone's number and color haven't changed significantly. It's basically the same as when we set off. Only then did Roland let out a sigh of relief. He smiled and said, Thank you for your hard work. You too, the witches replied in unison. Meals have been prepared in the reception hall. Chaos drinks are available in unlimited quantities. Please fill your stomachs first. Roland looked at the joyful faces of the witches and shook his head with a smile. As for the tequila witches who participated in the operation, they were basically regulars in the dream world, so there was no need for any additional rewards. Using Summer's backtracking ability to observe the instantaneous changes when the weapon was in action had always been the most reliable improvement method of the engineering department. By adjusting the backtracking speed, he could clearly understand the state of the target at every moment. Most of the problems and loopholes could be seen at a glance. However, as mentioned before, the glory of the sun was different from other weapons, especially the dirty bomb that had yet to fully activate. There would be a lot of materials that emitted fatal radiation left in the area. If one were to enter rashly, they would undoubtedly suffer from a large amount of radiation damage. For this reason, Roland did not hesitate to put the first tractor prototype into the project and modified it into a radiation-proof vehicle. Its left, right, rear, and bottom were wrapped with multiple layers of lead plates, sandwiched in the middle with gold foil and beryllium sheets. The overall thickness was up to 10 centimeters, making it highly shielded against photons, electrons, and neutron jets. Only the steam engine powered by the magic cube could handle the structural weight of the comprehensive protection. In addition, the car was equipped with oxygen and was almost completely isolated from the outside world, preventing the risk of radioactive dust entering the car through the ventilation channel. In order to observe the scene of the explosion, a huge lead-containing glass was installed in front of the car. The thickness of the glass was an astonishing 30 centimeters. Considering that entering and exiting the explosion test field might cause contaminants to stick to the tracks and armor, he specifically requested that once the personnel were sent out of the most dangerous core area, they should immediately change vehicles and abandon the former in the snow. It could be said that Roland had used all the safety measures he could think of, but even so, it was still difficult for him to relax. Fortunately, the final result showed that the observation operation was a complete success. After getting the first-hand information from the crime scene, Roland immediately started researching with Anna and Celine. Using the sigil of time to replay the scene that had been slowed down hundreds of times, the flaws of the number 1 principal device gradually surfaced. Our explosives are too weak, Anna said in a low voice. I can also see that the impact of the explosion didn't seem to be transmitted to the gun barrel. Celine nodded her main tentacle. Can we use batch detonation to solve this problem? I'm afraid there's not much hope in a short time. Roland rubbed his tired eyes. After watching the explosion live for 2 days in a row, he felt that the whole world was only left with blue and white colors. Although he had expected the problem of explosives, he did not expect it to be so obvious. Currently, Neverwinter had been mass-producing double-base smokeless gunpowder. Although it was not as powerful as RDX and other high explosives in terms of energy and explosive speed, it was enough for the army. Even if it was not powerful enough, it could be made up with quantity. However, When it was put into the principal device, the problem was revealed. More than 1,000 kilograms of explosives was definitely not a point on the blueprint. When stacked, it was as big as a safe. In order to transmit the explosive energy to the uranium, Roland specially made a funnel-like lens, hoping to concentrate the impact force as much as possible. There was no problem with this idea, but before the detonation reached this step, there was already a problem. Because the total volume of the explosives was too large, and every point was detonated at the same time, the shock waves produced by the explosives in front and behind offset each other. This could be clearly seen from the slow-motion playback. The colliding shock waves caused the entire steel lens and even the outer shell to be severely deformed, which meant that a large amount of energy acted on the outside of the gun barrel. Naturally, the energy used to move the uranium was much less. Then there was a chain reaction. The lack of pressure in the gun barrel caused the fission to stop quickly. Most of the uranium was vaporized at high temperature, which indirectly weakened the effect of the neutron source. "We can only find another way," Roland said with his hands spread out. Without electronic explosion control technology, it was almost impossible to ignite all the explosives in 1,000th of a second and cause the shock waves to overlap. Even if they replaced it with high explosives, it would only improve but not eliminate this problem. He could ask the Ministry of Chemical Industry to try to develop low-speed explosives and place them in front of the lens to minimize the impact between the explosives as much as possible. However, this process would probably require a lot of experiments, and it was hard to say whether it would succeed or not. Now, the most reliable way was obviously to make up for the shortcomings of the detonation technology through the configuration design. "It seems that I have to work overtime tonight," he said weakly as he stretched. "I'll be with you," Anna said with a smile. "How about a Blackfire massage as a reward?" "I suddenly feel full of energy." Roland was refreshed. "Is there any other reward?" "Like what?" "Let me think." "Oh, how about the one I mentioned last time? Is this also the knowledge I learned from the dream world?" Chapter 1328. Scroll went up to the 3rd floor of the castle with a large stack of documents and met Nightingale, who was yawning and about to leave, in front of the office. "You're still awake?" The latter stopped and raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Probably because I'm getting old and can't sleep recently." Scroll smiled and shook her head. "Where's His Majesty? Is he asleep?" "Yes, he went back to his bedroom half an hour ago." "Then why are you still in the office?" She covered her mouth and said, "Are you eating His Majesty's snacks?" Ha. Nightingale was slightly stunned at first, then she coughed twice and said, "Yes, I ate his spicy shredded beef and took 2 sips of chaos drinks." "Don't tell His Majesty." This time it was Scroll's turn to be stunned. What's wrong with her? Why did she reply so directly? In the past, as long as Nightingale was not caught on the spot, she would never admit to it. But when she thought that she and Vindy often stole Nightingale's drinks, Scroll didn't know what to say for a while. "Well, I'm going to bed." Nightingale looked away and walked to the 2nd floor. "Don't stay up too late. I heard from Roland that the older you get, the more serious the sequelae of lack of sleep." She looked up at the bottom of the stairs and said, "Good night." "Good night," Scroll replied inexplicably, then turned around and walked into the office. Although the fire in the fireplace had been extinguished, the remaining heat from the heater was still there, and there seemed to be some lingering fragrance in the air. It seemed that Nightingale had been here for a long time. Without thinking too much, Scroll skillfully opened the bookcase, sorted the documents in her hand into the processing column, and then took out the documents that His Majesty needed to solve. They were all extremely long lines of equations. From the handwriting, Scroll could tell that some of them were Roland's, Anna's, and Celine's. One of her daily jobs was to bring these documents to the Arithmetic Academy, let the group of astrologers calculate the answers, and then hand them over to the central carrier for verification. From the written description, these things should be related to His Majesty's new experiment. However, she could not understand how he could determine the dimensions of a device that no one had ever seen or even imagined just by calculating on a piece of paper. It was as if the numbers on the paper were not numbers, but an outline of reality. To her, this was no different from predicting the future. Every time Scroll saw Anna's elegant notes, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This girl, who was born in Border Town, had already reached a realm that they couldn't understand at all. Everyone had been sitting in the same office at the beginning, watching His Majesty's interesting scientific experiments, and anyone could have a word or two. Now the only one who could follow His Majesty closely was Anna. However, she did not feel any sense of loss in her heart. Instead, she was filled with pride, because they were her sisters. Scroll sat in front of Roland's desk and flipped through the documents as usual, intending to memorize all of them. This way, even if there were any omissions in the distribution calculation, she would be able to find them in time. But this time she noticed something strange. Am I seeing things? Scroll rubbed her eyes and found that there were strings of characters floating behind some formulas, as if they were the answers to her questions. If this was an examination paper or a household registration file, it wouldn't be surprising. Ever since she mastered the technique of quick searching, she could often tell where a document came from and everything related to it at first glance. The problem was that this was the first time she had seen this information. Not only could Scroll not understand the meaning of the arithmetic formulas, but even the answers floating behind them were also unclear. It was difficult to even understand them. Moreover, not every formula had similar strange symbols behind it. Most of the columns were still blank. If she stared at those illusory symbols for a long time, she would even feel dizzy. It seemed that Nightingale was right. Staying up too late really had an effect. Scroll sighed softly. Unfortunately, she hadn't been sleepy lately, as if her brain was always working at a high speed. Should I ask the hospital to prescribe some sleeping ferns tomorrow? She couldn't help but think that this thing didn't have much side effects on witches. Taking it once or twice shouldn't have any effect. After reluctantly memorizing all the information, Scroll suddenly felt a strong sense of dizziness, and even her consciousness became a little blurred. Her body involuntarily leaned forward, and the pen holder on the table was accidentally knocked down. But this dizziness came and went quickly. In just a few breaths, she felt that she had returned to normal. Not to mention any discomfort, her thoughts seemed to be much clearer than before. Scroll blinked her eyes, and after confirming that she was really okay, she smiled bitterly and bent down to pick up the pen holder. It was also at this moment that she felt as if she had been struck by lightning, because the appearance of the floor had changed. She would never mistake His Majesty's office. The floor was made of pine wood from the misty forest, and covered with a layer of wool carpet. Although the appearance was a little old, His Majesty had never changed it. And now the carpet under her feet was still wool carpet, but the material of the floor in the distance had changed. It had changed from wood to stone. How is this possible? Scroll cautiously raised her head, and her heart continued to sink. Not only the floor, but the whole office seemed to have changed. The recliner that Nightingale usually sat on had disappeared without a trace, and in its place was a row of old iron filing cabinets. At first glance, it looked a little like the archives in the administrative office. But I should have been in the castle before. That's right, the French windows. That was His Majesty's favorite decoration, and also a characteristic of the office. As long as you looked out, you could see the city of Neverwinter under the curtain of the night. Scroll suddenly turned around and pulled open the velvet curtains behind her. What she saw was only a gray brick wall. Without a doubt, this was no longer His Majesty's office that she was familiar with. She stood up in a panic, rushed to the wall, and knocked twice. The wall did not move at all. From the steady echo, she could tell that it was obviously not an illusion, but a real entity. Scroll felt a trace of despair. Anyone who was suddenly transferred to a completely closed and unfamiliar place would probably feel a strong sense of helplessness and vulnerability. No. She took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. It was not accurate to say that it was completely closed. In the corner between two rows of filing cabinets, there was an inconspicuous iron door. It was almost the same color as the cabinets, and if one did not look carefully, it would be easy to miss it. It seemed to be the only exit in the room. Where would the iron door lead to? Was it a trap or another wall waiting for her outside? Scroll resisted thinking about these questions, and slowly held the door handle. Click. The iron door opened with a click. A ray of golden sunlight shone into the room, and then the silence was broken. Countless sounds rushed in along with the cold air. There were noisy conversations, beeping whistles, and endless footsteps. In front of her, countless people were hurrying along with their heads down. Occasionally, some of them would glance at her, and their faces revealed a little bit of amazement. And behind this group of people, there were huge, mountain-like buildings rising one after another, occupying Scroll's entire field of vision. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.